During a break at a conference where I was teaching, a young college student came up to me and said, "I know you are teaching the 21 Laws of Leadership, but I want to get to the bottom line." With intensity, he raised his index finger and asked, "What is the one thing I need to know about leadership?" Trying to match his intensity, I raised my index finger and answered, "The one thing you need to know about leadership is that there is more than one thing that you need to know about leadership. To lead well, we must do 21 things well." Each law was like a tool, ready to be picked up and used to help you achieve your dreams and add value to other people. Pick up even one, and you will become a better leader. Learn them all, and people will gladly follow you. Now, let's open the toolbox together. Law number 1. The law of the lid. Leadership ability determines a person's level of effectiveness. Leadership ability is the lid that determines a person's level of effectiveness. The lower an individual's ability to lead, the lower the lid on his potential. The higher the individual's ability to lead, the higher the lid on his potential. Let me tell you a story that illustrates the law of the lid. In the 1930s, two young brothers named Dick and Maurice moved from New Hampshire to California in search of the American dream. After a while, their entrepreneurial spirit and interest in the entertainment industry prompted them to open a small drive-in restaurant in Pasadena, located just east of Glendale. Dick and Maurice's tiny drive-in restaurant was a great success, and in 1940 they decided to move the operation to San Bernardino, a working-class boomtown 50 miles east of Los Angeles. They built a larger facility and expanded their menu from hot dogs, fries, and shakes to include barbecue beef and pork sandwiches, hamburgers, and other items. Their business exploded. Annual sales reached $200,000, and the brothers found themselves splitting $50,000 in profits every year, a sum that put them in the town's financial elite. By the mid-1950s, annual revenue hit $350,000, and by then Dick and Maurice split net profits of about $100,000 each year. Who were these brothers? Back in those days, you could have found out by driving to their small restaurant on the corner of 14th and E Streets in San Bernardino. On the front of the small octagonal building hung a neon sign that said simply, "McDonald's Hamburgers." Dick and Maurice McDonald had hit the great American jackpot, and the rest, as they say, is history, right? Wrong. The McDonalds never went any farther because their weak leadership put a lid on their ability to succeed. They lacked the leadership necessary to make a larger enterprise effective. Dick and Maurice were good single restaurant owners. They understood how to run a business, make their systems efficient, cut costs, and increase profits. They were efficient managers, but they were not leaders. Their thinking patterns clamped a lid down on what they could do and become. At the height of their success, Dick and Maurice found themselves smack dab against the law of the lid. In 1954, the brothers hooked up with a man named Ray Kroc, who was a leader. Kroc had been running a small company he founded which sold machines for making milkshakes. He knew about McDonald's. The restaurant was one of his best customers, and as soon as he visited the store, he had a vision for its potential. In his mind, he could see the restaurant going nationwide in hundreds of markets. He soon struck a deal with Dick and Maurice, and in 1955, he formed McDonald's Systems, Inc., later called the McDonald's Corporation. Between 1955 and 59, Kroc succeeded in opening 100 restaurants. 4 years after that, there were 500 McDonald's. Today, the company has opened more than 31,000 restaurants in 119 countries. Leadership ability, or more specifically, the lack of leadership ability, was the lid on the McDonald's brothers' effectiveness. I believe that success is within the reach of just about everyone. But I also believe that personal success without leadership ability brings only limited effectiveness. Without leadership ability, a person's impact is only a fraction of what it could be with good leadership. The higher you want to climb, the more you need leadership. The greater the impact you want to make, the greater your influence needs to be. Whatever you will accomplish is restricted by your ability to lead others. Leadership ability is always the lid on personal and organizational effectiveness. If a person's leadership is strong, the organization's lid is high. But if it's not, then the organization is limited. That's why in times of trouble, organizations naturally look for new leadership. Wherever you look, you can find smart, talented, successful people who are able to go only so far because of the limitations of their leadership. For example, when Apple got started in the late 1970s, Steve Wozniak was the brains behind the Apple computer. His leadership lid was low, but that was not the case for his partner, Steve Jobs. His lid was so high that he built a world-class organization and gave it a 9-digit value. That's the impact of the law of the lid. In the 1980s, I met Don Stevenson, the chairman of Global Hospitality Resources, Inc. of San Diego, California, an international hospitality advisory and consulting firm. Over lunch, I asked him about his organization. Today, he primarily does consulting, but back then, his company took over the management of hotels and resorts that weren't doing well financially. His company oversaw many excellent facilities such as La Costa in Southern California. Don said that whenever his people went into an organization to take it over, they always started by doing two things. First, they trained all the staff to improve their level of service to the customers, and second, they fired the leader. When he told me that, I was surprised. "You always fire him?" I asked. "Every time?" "That's right, every time," he said. "Don't you talk to the person first to check him out to see if he's a good leader?" I said. "No," he answered. "If he'd been a good leader, the organization wouldn't be in the mess that it's in." And I thought to myself, of course, it's the law of the lid. To reach the highest level of effectiveness, you have to raise the lid one way or the other. Law number 2, the law of influence. The true measure of leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. What do leaders look like? Do they always look powerful, impressive, charismatic? And how do you measure the effectiveness of a leader? Can you put two people side by side and instantly tell which is the better leader? These are questions people have asked for hundreds of years. One of the most effective leaders of the 20th century was anything but impressive upon first appearance. When people think of Mother Teresa, they envision a frail little woman dedicated to serving the poorest of the poor. But she was also a tremendous leader. I say that because she had an amazing amount of influence with others. And if you don't have influence, you will never be able to lead others. Mother Teresa's impact reached far beyond her immediate environment. People from all walks of life and from nations around the globe respected her, and when she spoke, people listened. Author and former presidential speechwriter Peggy Noonan wrote about a speech Mother Teresa gave at the National Prayer Breakfast in 1994. It illustrates her level of influence with others. Noonan observed, "The Washington establishment was there, plus a few thousand born-again Christians, Orthodox Catholics, and Jews. Mother Teresa spoke of God, of love, of families. She said we must love one another and care for one another. There were great purrs of agreement." But as the speech continued, it became more pointed. She spoke of unhappy parents in old people's homes who are hurt because they are forgotten. She asked, "Are we willing to give until it hurts in order to be with our families, or do we put our own interests first?" The baby boomers in the audience began to shift in their seats, and she continued, "I feel that the great destroyer of peace today is abortion," she said, and she told them why, in uncompromising terms. For about 1.3 seconds there was a silence, then applause swept the room. But not everyone clapped. The President and First Lady, Bill and Hillary Clinton, the Vice President and Mrs. Gore looked like seated statues at Madame Tussauds, moving not a muscle. Mother Teresa didn't stop there either. When she was finished, there was almost no one she hadn't offended. At that time, if just about any other person in the world had made those statements, people's reactions would have been openly hostile. They would have booed, jeered, or stormed out. But the speaker was Mother Teresa. She was a real leader, and when the real leader speaks, people listen. Leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. Leadership is often misunderstood. When people hear that someone has an impressive title or an assigned leadership position, they assume that individual to be a leader. Sometimes that's true, but titles don't have much value when it comes to leading. True leadership cannot be awarded, appointed, or assigned. It comes only from influence, and that cannot be mandated. It must be earned. The only thing a title can buy is a little time, either to increase your level of influence with others or to undermine it. There are plenty of misconceptions and myths that people embrace about leaders and leadership. Here are some of the common ones. First, the management myth. A widespread misunderstanding is that leading and managing are one and the same. The main difference between the two is that leadership is about influencing people to follow, while management focuses on maintaining systems and processes. The best way to test whether a person can lead rather than manage is to ask him to create positive change. Managers can maintain direction, but often they can't change it. Systems and processes can do only so much. To move people in a new direction, you need influence. Number 2 is the entrepreneur myth. Frequently, people assume that all entrepreneurs are leaders, but that's not always the case. Entrepreneurs are skilled at seeing opportunities and going after them. They see needs and understand how to meet them in a way that produces a profit. But not all of them are good with people. Many find it necessary to partner with someone skilled at the people part of the equation. If they can't influence people, they can't lead. Number 3, the knowledge myth. Sir Francis Bacon said, "Knowledge is power." If you believe power to be the essence of leadership, then you might naturally assume that those who possess knowledge and intelligence are therefore leaders. That isn't necessarily true. You can visit any major university and meet brilliant research scientists and philosophers whose ability to think is so high that it's off the charts, but whose ability to lead is so low that it doesn't even register on the charts. Neither IQ nor education necessarily equates to leadership. Number 4, the pioneer myth. Another misconception is that anyone who is out in front of the crowd is a leader. But being first isn't always the same as leading. To be a leader, a person has to not only be out front, but also have people intentionally coming behind him, following his lead, and acting on his vision. Being a trendsetter is not the same as being a leader. Don't listen to the claims of the person professing to be a leader. Don't examine his credentials. Don't check his title. Check his influence. The proof of leadership is found in the followers. I personally learned the law of influence when I accepted my first job out of college. I went in with all the right credentials. I had the proper college degree. I had a great deal of insight into the work because of the training given to me by my father. I possessed the position and the title of leader in the organization. It made for a good-looking resume, but it didn't make me the real leader. At my first board meeting, I quickly found out who the real leader was, a farmer named Claude. When he spoke, people listened. When he made a suggestion, people respected it. When he led, others followed. If I wanted to make an impact, I would have to influence Claude. He, in turn, would influence everybody else. It was the law of influence at work. That being the case, why do some people emerge as leaders while others can't influence people, no matter how hard they try? I believe that several factors come into play. Character. who they are. True leadership always begins with the inner person. That's why someone like Billy Graham is able to draw more and more followers to him as time goes by. People can sense the depth of his character. Relationships. Who they know. You're a leader only if you have followers, and that always requires the development of relationships. The deeper the relationships, the stronger the potential for leadership. In my career, each time I entered a new leadership position, I immediately started building relationships. Build enough of the right kinds of relationships with the right people, and you can become the real leader in an organization. Knowledge. What they know. Information is vital to a leader. You need a grasp of the facts, an understanding of dynamic factors and timing, and a vision for the future. Knowledge alone won't make someone a leader, but without knowledge, no one can become one. Whenever I was new in an organization, I always spent a lot of time doing homework before I tried to take the lead. Intuition. What they feel. Leadership requires more than just a command of data. It demands an ability to deal with numerous intangibles. In fact, that is often one of the main differences between managers and leaders. Leaders seek to recognize and influence intangibles such as energy, morale, timing, and momentum. Experience. Where they've been. The greater the challenge you've faced as a leader in the past, the more likely followers are to give you a chance in the present. Experience doesn't guarantee credibility, but gives you a chance to prove that you are capable. Past successes. What they've done. Nothing speaks to followers like a good track record. Ability. What they can do. The bottom line for followers is what a leader is capable of. They want to know whether that person can lead the team to victory. Ultimately, that's the reason people will listen to you and acknowledge you as their leader. As soon as they no longer believe you can deliver, they will stop listening and following. I love the leadership proverb that says, "He who thinks he leads but has no followers is only taking a walk." If you can't influence people, then they will not follow you. And if people won't follow, you are not a leader. That's the law of influence. Law number 3, the law of process. Leadership develops daily, not in a day. Ann Schreiber was 101 years old when she died in January 1995. For years, she had lived in a tiny, run-down, rent-controlled studio apartment in Manhattan. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the old bookcases that lined the walls were covered in dust. Rent was $400 a month. Schreiber lived on Social Security and a small monthly pension, which she started receiving in 1943 when she retired as an auditor for the Internal Revenue Service. She was 51 when she retired and was making only $3,150 a year. Schreiber was the model of thrift. She didn't spend money on herself. She didn't buy new furniture as the old pieces she owned became worn out. She didn't even subscribe to a newspaper. About once a week, she used to go to the public library to read the Wall Street Journal. Imagine the surprise of Norman Lamb, the president of Yeshiva University in New York City, when he found out that Ann Schreiber, a little old lady whose name he had never heard and who had never attended Yeshiva, left nearly her entire estate to the university. When I saw the will, it was mind-blowing. Such an unexpected windfall, said Lamb. This woman has become a legend overnight. The estate Ann Schreiber left to Yeshiva University was worth $22 million. How in the world did a spinster who had been retired for 50 years build an 8-figure fortune? The answer is, she did it, one day at a time. By the time she retired from the IRS in 1943, she had managed to save $5,000. She invested that money in stocks. In 1950, she had made enough profit to buy 1,000 shares of Shearing Plow Corporation stock, then valued at $10,000. and she held on to that stock, letting its value build. By the time she died, those original shares split enough times to produce 128,000 shares worth $7.5 million. When it came to finances, Schreiber understood and applied the law of process. Becoming a leader is a lot like investing successfully in the stock market. If you hope to make a fortune in a day, you're not going to be successful. There are no successful day traders in leadership development. What matters most is what you do day by day over the long haul. If you continually invest in your leadership development, letting your assets compound, the inevitable result is growth over time. In a study of 90 top leaders from a variety of fields, leadership experts Warren Bennis and Bert Nannis made a discovery about a relationship between growth and leadership. It is the capacity to develop and improve their skills that distinguishes leaders from their followers. That's what happened to me when I took my first leadership position in 1969. I had captained sports teams all my life and had been the student government president in college, so I already thought that I was a leader. But when I tried to lead people in the real world, I found out the awful truth. Being put in charge is not the same as being a leader. I struggled for a while in that first leadership position. To be honest, I relied on my extremely high energy and whatever charisma I possessed. But there came a moment when I realized that leadership was going to be the key to my professional career. If I didn't get better at leadership, my career would eventually bog down, and I would never reach the goals that I had set for myself. Fortunately, at that time, I had breakfast with Kurt Kampmeyer of Success Motivation, Inc. At that breakfast, he asked me a question that would change my life. "John," he asked, "what is your plan for personal growth?" I fumbled for an answer and then finally admitted that I didn't have one. That night, my wife Margaret and I decided to make financial sacrifices so that I could get on the program that Kurt offered. That was an intentional step toward growth. From that day to now, I have made it a practice to read books, listen to tapes, and go to conferences on leadership. Around the time I met with Kurt, I also had another idea. I wrote to the top 10 leaders in my field and offered them $100 for half an hour of their time so I could ask them some questions. That was quite a sum for me back then. For the next several years, Margaret and I planned every vacation around where those leaders lived. If a great leader in Cleveland said yes to my request, then that year we vacationed in Cleveland so I could meet him. I can't explain how valuable those experiences were for me. Those leaders shared insights with me that I could have learned no other way. When you recognize your lack of skill and begin the daily discipline of personal growth, exciting things start to happen. What a person does on a disciplined, consistent basis gets him ready no matter what the goal. You can see the effect of the law of process in any walk of life. NBA Hall of Fame player Larry Bird became an outstanding free throw shooter by practicing 500 shots each morning before he went to school. Demosthenes of ancient Greece became the greatest orator by reciting verses with pebbles in his mouth and speaking over the roar of the ocean's waves, and he did it despite having been born with a speech impediment. You need to have the same dedication. To become an excellent leader, you need to work on it every day. Law number 4, the law of navigation. Anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. In 1911, 2 groups of explorers set off on an incredible mission. Though they used different strategies and routes, the leaders of the teams had the very same goal: to be the first in history to reach the South Pole. Their stories are life-and-death illustrations of the law of navigation. One group was led by Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen. Ironically, Amundsen had not originally intended to go to Antarctica. His desire was to be the first man to reach the North Pole. But when he discovered that Robert Peary had beaten him there, Amundsen changed his goal and headed toward the other end of the earth, North or south, he knew his planning would pay off. Before his team ever set off, Amundsen had painstakingly planned this trip. He studied the methods of the Eskimos and other experienced Arctic travelers, and determined that their best course of action would be to transport all of their equipment and supplies by dog sled. When he assembled his team, he chose expert skiers and dog handlers. His strategy was simple. The dogs would do most of the work as the group traveled 15 to 20 miles in a 6-hour period each day. That would afford both the dogs and the men plenty of time for daily rest prior to the following day's travel. Amundsen's forethought and attention to detail were incredible. He located and stocked supply depots all along the intended route. That way, they would not have to carry every bit of their supplies with them the whole trip. He also equipped his people with the best gear possible. Amundsen had carefully considered every possible aspect of the journey, thought it through, and planned accordingly. And it paid off. The worst problem they experienced on their trip was an infected tooth that one man had to have extracted. The other team of people was led by Robert Falcon Scott, a British naval officer who had previously done some exploring in the Antarctic area. Scott's expedition was the antithesis of Amundsen's. Instead of using dog sleds, Scott decided to use motorized sledges and ponies. Their problems began when the motors on the sledges stopped working only 5 days into the trip. The ponies didn't fare well either in those frigid temperatures. When they reached the foot of the Transantarctic Mountains, all of the poor animals had to be killed. As a result, the team members themselves ended up hauling the 200-pound sledges. Scott hadn't given enough attention to the team's other equipment either. Their clothes were so poorly designed that all of the men developed frostbite. One team member required an hour every morning just to get his boots onto his swollen, gangrenous feet. Everyone became snowblind because of their inadequate goggles that Scott had supplied. On top of everything else, the team was always low on food and water. That was also due to Scott's poor planning. The depots of supplies Scott established were inadequately stocked, too far apart, and often poorly marked, which made them very difficult to find. Because they were continually low on fuel to melt snow, everyone became dehydrated. Making things even worse was Scott's last-minute decision to take along a 5th man, even though they had prepared enough supplies for only 4. After covering a grueling 800 miles in 10 weeks, Scott's exhausted group finally arrived at the South Pole on January 17, 1912. There they found the Norwegian flag flapping in the wind and a letter from Amundsen. The other well-led team had beaten them to their goal by more than a month. Scott's expedition to the pole is a classic example of a leader who could not navigate for his people. But the trek back was even worse. Scott and his men were starving and suffering from scurvy, yet Scott, unable to navigate to the very end, was oblivious to their plight. With time running out and the food supply desperately low, Scott insisted that they collect 30 pounds of geological specimens to take back, more weight to be carried by the worn-out men. The group's progress became slower and slower. One member of the party sank into a stupor and died. Another, Lawrence Oates, a former Army officer who had originally been brought along to care for the ponies, had frostbite so severe that he had trouble doing anything. Because he believed that he was endangering the team's survival, he purposely walked out into a blizzard to keep from hindering the group. Before he left the tent and headed into the storm, he said, "I'm just going outside. I may be some time." Scott and his final 2 team members made it only a little further north before giving up. The return trip had taken 2 months, and they still were 150 miles from their base camp. There they died. We know their story only because they spent their last hours updating their diaries. Some of Scott's last words were these: "We shall die like gentlemen. I think this will show that the spirit of pluck and power to endure has not passed out of our race." Scott had the courage, but not the leadership. Because he was unable to live by the law of navigation, he and his companions died by it. Followers need leaders able to effectively navigate for them. When they're facing life and death situations, the necessity is painfully obvious. But even when consequences aren't as serious, the need is also great. The truth is that nearly anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. That is the law of navigation. Leaders who navigate do even more than control the direction in which they and their people travel. They see the whole trip in their minds before they leave the dock. They have vision for getting to their destination. They understand what it will take to get there. They know who they'll need on the team to be successful. And they recognize the obstacles long before they appear on the horizon. Before good leaders take their people on a journey, they go through a process in order to give the trip the best chance of being a success. Navigators draw on past experience. Every past success and failure you've experienced can be a valuable source of information and wisdom, if you allow it to be. Successes teach you what you're capable of doing and give you confidence. However, your failures often teach you greater lessons. They reveal wrong assumptions, character flaws, errors in judgment, and poor working methods. Ironically, many people hate their failures so much that they quickly cover them up instead of analyzing them and learning from them. Why do I even mention something that seems so basic? Because most natural leaders are activists. They tend to look forward, not backward, make decisions, and then move on. I know this because that is my tendency. But for leaders to become good navigators, they need to take time to reflect and learn from their experiences. Navigators examine the conditions before making commitments. Drawing on experience means looking inward. Examining conditions means looking outward. No good leader plans a course of action without paying close attention to current conditions. That would be like setting sail against the tide or plotting a course into a hurricane. Good navigators count the costs before making the commitments for themselves and others. They examine not only measurable factors such as finances, resources, and talent, but also intangibles such as timing, morale, momentum, culture, and so on. Navigators listen to what others have to say. No matter how good a leader you are, you yourself will not have all the answers. That's why top-notch navigators gather information from many sources. For example, before Roald Amundsen began his expedition to the South Pole, he had learned from a group of Native Americans in Canada about warm clothing and Arctic survival techniques. Those skills and practices meant the difference between failure and success for his team in Antarctica. Navigators make sure their conclusions represent both faith and fact. Being able to navigate for others requires a leader to possess a positive attitude. You've got to have faith that you can take your people all the way. If you can't confidently make the trip in your mind, you're not going to be able to take it in real life. On the other hand, you have to be able to see the facts realistically. You can't minimize obstacles or rationalize your challenges and still lead effectively. If you don't go in with your eyes wide open, you're going to get blindsided. When you prepare well, you convey confidence and trust to people. Lack of preparation has the opposite effect. In the end, it's not the size of the project that determines its acceptance, support, and success. It's the size of the leader. That's why I say that anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. Leaders who are good navigators are capable of taking their people just about anywhere. Number 5, the law of addition. Leaders add value by serving others. In a world where many political leaders enjoy their power and prestige, and where CEOs of large corporations make astronomical incomes, work and live in luxury, and appear to be most concerned with what's in it for them, Jim Sinegal is an oddity. Sinegal is the co-founder and CEO of Costco, the 4th largest retailer in the United States and the 9th largest in the world. He doesn't seem much interested in perks. He works in an unremarkable office comprised primarily of folding tables and chairs. If he invites someone to meet him at the corporate offices, he goes down to the lobby to meet his guest. He answers his own phone, and he takes a salary of only $350,000 a year, which puts him in the bottom 10% of CEOs of large corporations. Retail experts give a lot of attention to Senegal's formula for success. Offer a limited number of items, rely on high-volume sales, keep costs as low as possible, and don't spend money on advertising. But there is something that separates him from the competitors who employ similar strategies: the way he treats his employees. He believes in paying his employees well and offering them good benefit packages. Costco employees are paid an average of 42% more than the company's chief rival, and Costco employees pay a fraction of the national average for health care. Senegal believes that if you pay people well, you get good people and good productivity. You also get employee loyalty. Costco has by far the lowest employee turnover rate in all of retailing. But Senegal's leadership style of adding value doesn't end with employee compensation. He goes out of his way to show Costco workers that he cares about them. He maintains an open-door policy with everyone. He wears an employee name tag, is on a first-name basis with everyone, and makes sure to visit every single Costco store at least once a year. No manager and no staff in any business feels very good if the boss is not interested enough to come and see them, says Senegal. And when he shows up, his people are always glad to see him. The employees know that I want to say hello to them because I like them. Senegal goes out of his way to show his people that he cares. He once flew from Texas to the San Francisco area when he heard that a Costco executive was hospitalized for emergency surgery. It came as no surprise to the executive. It was consistent with the way that Senegal always leads. When it comes down to it, Senegal is more focused on adding value to people by serving them than on serving himself or making himself richer with an exorbitant salary. He lives by the law of addition. I just think that if you're going to try to run an organization that's very cost-conscious, then you can't have those disparities. Having an individual who is making 100 or 200 or 300 times more than the average person working on the floor is wrong. Senegal sums it up this way: this is not altruistic. This is good business. He could also say it's good leadership. Many people view leadership the same way they view success, hoping to go as far as they can to climb the ladder to achieve the highest position possible for their talent. But contrary to conventional thinking, I believe the bottom line in leadership isn't how far we advance ourselves, but how far we advance others. That is achieved by serving others and adding value to their lives. The interaction between every leader and follower is a relationship, and all relationships either add to or subtract from a person's life. If you are a leader, then trust me, you are having either a positive or negative impact on the people you lead. How can you tell? There is one critical question. Are you making things better for the people who follow you? That's it. If you cannot answer with an unhesitant yes and give some evidence that backs it up, then you may very well be a subtractor. Often subtractors don't realize that they are subtracting from others. I would say that 90% of all people who subtract from others do so unintentionally. They don't recognize their negative impact on others, and when a leader is a subtractor and doesn't change his ways, it's only a matter of time before his impact on others goes from subtraction to division. In contrast, 90% of all the people who add value to others do so intentionally. Why do I say that? Because human beings are naturally selfish. I'm selfish. Being an adder requires me to get out of my comfort zone every day and think about adding value to others. But that's what it takes to be a leader whom others want to follow. Do that long enough, and you not only add value to others, you begin to multiply it. The people who make the greatest difference seem to understand this. If you think about some of the people who have won the Nobel Peace Prize, for example, Albert Schweitzer, Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, and Bishop Desmond Tutu, you see leaders who were less interested in their position and more interested in their positive impact on others. If you read their writings, or more important, study their lives, you notice that they wanted to make things better for others, to add value to people's lives. They didn't set out to receive the Nobel Prize. They desired to engage in noble service to their fellow human beings. The specifics depend on the vision, the type of work, and the organization. But the intention is always the same, to add value. When you add value to people, you lift them up, help them advance, make them part of something bigger than themselves, and assist them in becoming who they were made to be. Often their leader is the only person able to help them to do those things. Darrell Hartley Leonard, who retired as chairman of the board of Hyatt Hotels Corporation and is currently chairman and chief executive officer of Production Group International, says, "When a person moves into a position of authority, he or she gives up the right to abuse people." I believe that is true. But that is only the beginning of good leadership. Effective leaders go beyond not harming others, and they intentionally help others. To do that, they must value people and demonstrate that they care in such a way that their followers know it. The whole idea of adding value to other people depends on the idea that you have something of value to add. You can't give what you do not possess. What do you have to give others? Can you teach skills? Can you give opportunities? Can you give insight and perspective gained through experience? The more you continue to pursue personal growth, the more you will continue to have to offer. As leaders, how do we know and relate to what our people value? We listen. Inexperienced leaders are quick to lead before knowing anything about the people they intend to lead. But mature leaders listen, learn, and then lead. They listen to their people's stories. They find out about their hopes and dreams. They become acquainted with their aspirations, and they pay attention to their emotions. From those things, they learn about their people. They discover what is valuable to them, and then they lead based upon what they have learned. When you do that, everyone wins: the organization, the leader, and the followers. I believe that God desires us not only to treat people with respect, but also to actively reach out to them and serve them. When I moved my companies and my family to Atlanta in 1997, it wasn't long before I received a call from Dan Cathy, the president of Chick-fil-A, the privately held national restaurant chain. He had a question for me. "John, how can we help you in your organization?" What I discovered as I got to know Dan, Truett Cathy, his father and founder of Chick-fil-A, and their entire organization, is that an attitude of service pervades everything they do. In 2005, when I hosted Exchange, a weekend leadership growth experience for executives, I took the participants to Chick-fil-A's headquarters south of Atlanta. Everyone got to see the company's operations, meet Truett Cathy, and hear Dan Cathy speak about the organization. He shared many eye-opening comments that revealed their dedication to service and adding value to their employees and customers. For example, Dan was preparing that day to camp out with customers for the 19th time on the eve of a new restaurant opening. He said that he had gotten to know customers and their desires in a way he never could before he had started that practice. If you desire to add value by serving others, you will begin to become a better leader, and your people will achieve more, develop more loyalty, and have a better time getting things done than you ever thought possible. That is the power of the law of addition. Law number 6, the law of solid ground. Trust is the foundation of leadership. How important is trust for a leader? It is the most important thing. Trust is the foundation of leadership. It is the glue that holds an organization together. Leaders cannot repeatedly break trust with people and continue to influence them. It just doesn't happen. As a nation, we have seen our trust in leaders go up and down during the last several decades. Watergate certainly took its toll on the American people's confidence in leadership. Trust in President Richard Nixon became so low that he had no choice but to resign. He lost his ability to influence. Bill Clinton was a remarkably gifted leader, but questions of trust undermined his leadership. The corporate scandals of the 1990s shook people's confidence in business leadership. Reports of sexual harassment at the military academies undermined confidence in leadership in the armed services. And the incidents of abuse in the Catholic Church disillusioned many people with its leadership. Leaders cannot lose trust and continue to influence others. Trust is the foundation of leadership. That's the law of solid ground. Trust is like change in a leader's pocket. Each time you make a good leadership decision, you earn more change. Each time you make poor decisions, you pay out some of your change to the people. All leaders have a certain amount of change in their pocket when they start in their new leadership position. Whatever they do either builds up their change or depletes it. If leaders make one bad decision after another, they keep paying out change. Then one day, after making one last bad decision, they suddenly and irreparably run out of change. It doesn't even matter if that last blunder was big or small. At that point, it's too late. When you're out of change, you're out as the leader. In contrast, leaders who keep making good decisions and keep recording wins for their organization build up change. Then, even if they make a huge blunder, they still have plenty of change left over. How does a leader build trust? By consistently exemplifying competence, connection, and character. People will forgive occasional mistakes based on ability, especially if they can see that you're still growing as a leader. And they will give you some time to connect, but they won't trust someone who has slips in his character. In that area, even occasional lapses are lethal. Whenever you lead people, it's as if they consent to take a journey with you. The way that trip is going to turn out is predicted by your character. With good character, the longer the trip is, the better it seems. But if your character is flawed, the longer the trip is, the worse it gets. Why? Because no one enjoys spending time with someone he doesn't trust. A person's character quickly communicates many things to others. Here are the most important ones. Character communicates consistency. Leaders without inner strength can't be counted on day after day because their ability to perform changes constantly. If your people don't know what to expect from you as a leader, at some point they won't look to you for leadership. Character communicates potential. Weak character is limiting. Who do you think has the greatest potential to achieve great dreams and have a positive impact on others? Someone who is honest, disciplined, and hardworking, or someone who is deceitful, impulsive, and lazy? It sounds obvious when it's phrased that way, doesn't it? Poor character is like a time bomb ticking away. It's only a matter of time before it blows up a person's ability to perform and the capacity to lead. Why? Because people with weak character are not trustworthy, and trust is the foundation of leadership. Character communicates respect. When you don't have character within, you can't earn respect without. And respect is absolutely essential for lasting leadership. How do leaders earn respect? By making sound decisions, by admitting their mistakes, and by putting what's best for their followers and the organization ahead of their personal agendas. I mentioned Watergate and the various public scandals that have undermined the public's confidence in leaders during the last 30 years. But the event that I believe began to erode the public's faith in the nation's leaders and develop strong skepticism in the country was the war in Vietnam. The actions taken by members of the Johnson administration, the mistakes made by Robert McNamara, and their unwillingness to face and admit those mistakes broke trust with the American people. They violated the law of solid ground, and the United States has been suffering from the repercussions ever since. If you experienced those war years, you may be surprised to know that in the beginning, American support for the war was very strong, even as the number of troops being sent overseas rapidly increased and the casualties mounted. By 1966, more than 200,000 Americans had been sent to Vietnam, yet two-thirds of all Americans surveyed by Lewis Harris believed that Vietnam was the place where the United States should stand and fight communism. And most people expressed the belief that the United States should stay until the fight was finished. But support eventually eroded. The Vietnam War was being handled very badly. On top of that, our leaders continued the war even after they realized that we couldn't win. But the worst mistake of all was that McNamara and President Johnson weren't honest with the American people about it. And because trust is the foundation of leadership, it ultimately destroyed the administration's leadership. In his book, In Retrospect, McNamara recounts that he repeatedly minimized American losses and told only half-truths about the war. For example, he says, "Upon my return to Washington from Saigon on December 21, 1963, I was less than candid when I reported to the press. I said we observed the results of very substantial increase in Viet Cong activity, which is true. But I then added, we reviewed the plans of the South Vietnamese, and we have every reason to believe that they will be successful, an overstatement at best." For a while, nobody questioned McNamara's statements because there was no reason to mistrust the country's leaders. But in time, people recognized that his words and the facts weren't matching up. And that's when the American public began to lose faith. Years later, McNamara admitted his failure. "We of the Kennedy and Johnson administration who participated in the decisions on Vietnam act according to what we thought were the principles and the traditions of this nation. We made our decisions in light of those values, yet we were wrong, terribly wrong." Many would argue that McNamara's admission came 30 years and 58,000 lives too late. The cost of Vietnam was high, and not just in human lives. As the American people's trust in their leaders deteriorated, so did their willingness to follow them. Protests led to open rebellion and to society-wide turmoil. The era that had begun with hope and idealism characterized by John F. Kennedy ultimately ended with the mistrust and cynicism associated with Richard Nixon. Whenever a leader breaks the law of solid ground, he pays a price in his leadership. McNamara and President Johnson lost the trust of the American people, and their ability to lead suffered as a result. Eventually, McNamara resigned as Secretary of Defense. Johnson, the consummate politician, recognized his weakened position, and he didn't run for re-election. But the repercussions of broken trust didn't end there. The American people's distrust for politicians has continued to this day. No leader can break trust with his people and expect to keep influencing them. Trust is the foundation of leadership. Violate the law of solid ground, and you diminish your influence as a leader. Law number 7. The law of respect. People naturally follow leaders stronger than themselves. If you had seen her, your first reaction might not have been respect. She wasn't a very impressive-looking woman, just a little over 5 feet tall, in her late 30s, with dark brown weathered skin. She couldn't read or write. The clothes she wore were coarse and worn. When she smiled, she revealed that her 2 top front teeth were missing. Her employment was erratic. Most of the time she took domestic jobs in small hotels, scrubbing floors, making up rooms, and cooking. But just about every spring and fall she would disappear from her place of employment, come back broke, and work again to scrape together what little money she could. When she was present on the job, she worked hard and seemed physically tough. But she also was known to suddenly fall asleep, sometimes in the middle of a conversation. She attributed her affliction to a blow in the head that she had taken during a teenage fight. Who would respect a woman like that? The answer is more than 300 slaves who followed her to freedom out of the South. They recognized and respected her leadership. So did just about every abolitionist in New England. The year was 1857. The woman's name was Harriet Tubman. Tubman started life as a slave. She was born in 1820 and grew up in the farmland of Maryland. When she was 13, she received the blow to her head that troubled her all of her life. She was in a store, and a white overseer demanded her assistance so that he could beat an escaping slave. When she refused and blocked the overseer's way, the man threw a 2-pound weight that hit Tubman in the head. She nearly died, and her recovery took months. At age 24, she married John Tubman, a free black man. But when she talked to him about escaping to freedom in the North, he wouldn't hear of it. He said that if she tried to leave, he'd turn her in. When she resolved to take her chances and go north in 1849, she did so alone, without a word to him. Though free herself, she vowed to return to Maryland and bring her family out. In 1850, she made her first return trip as an Underground Railroad conductor, someone who retrieved and guided out slaves with the assistance of sympathizers along the way. Each summer and winter, Tubman worked as a domestic, scraping together the funds she needed to make the return trips to the South. And every spring and fall, she risked her life by going south and returning with more people. She was fearless, and her leadership was unshakable. Hers was an extremely dangerous work, and when people in her charge wavered or had second thoughts, she was strong as steel. Tubman knew that escaped slaves who returned would be beaten and tortured until they gave information about those who had helped them. So she never allowed any people that she was guiding to give up. "Dead folks tell no tales," she would say to a faint-hearted slave, as she put a loaded pistol to his head. "You go on or die." Between 1850 and 1860, Harriet Tubman guided out more than 300 people, including many of her family members. She made 19 trips in all and was very proud of the fact that she never once lost a single person under her care. At the time, Southern whites put a $12,000 price on her head, a fortune. Southern blacks simply called her Moses. By the start of the Civil War, she had brought more people out of slavery than any other American in history, black or white, male or female. Harriet Tubman would appear to be an unlikely candidate for leadership because the deck was certainly stacked against her. She was uneducated. She began life as a slave. She lived in a culture that didn't respect African Americans, and she labored in a country where women didn't have the right to vote yet. Despite her circumstances, she became an incredible leader. The reason is simple. People naturally follow leaders stronger than themselves. Everyone who came in contact with her recognized her strong leadership ability and felt compelled to follow her. That's how the law of respect works. People don't follow others by accident. They follow individuals whose leadership they respect. People who are an 8 in leadership on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being the strongest, don't go out and look for a 6 to follow. They naturally follow a 9 or a 10. The less skilled follow the more highly skilled and gifted. Occasionally a strong leader may choose to follow someone weaker than himself, but when that happens, it's for a reason. For example, the stronger leader may do it out of respect for the person's office or past accomplishments, or he may be following the chain of command. In general, though, followers are attracted to people who are better leaders than themselves. That is the law of respect. When people get together for the first time in a group, consider what happens. As they start interacting, the leaders in the group immediately take charge. They think in terms of the direction they desire to go and who they want to take with them. At first, people may make tentative moves in many different directions, but after the people get to know one another, it doesn't take long for them to recognize the strongest leaders and to start following them. What causes one person to respect and follow another? Is it because of the qualities of a leader? Is it due to a process the leader and follower engage in? Does it occur because of the circumstances? I believe all of those factors can come into play. Based on my observations and personal experience, here are the top 5 ways that leaders gain others' respect. Number 1, natural leadership ability. Some people are born with greater skills and ability to lead than others. All leaders are not created equal. If you possess natural leadership ability, people will want to follow you. They will want to be around you. They will listen to you. However, one of the greatest potential pitfalls for natural leaders is relying on talent alone. Number 2, respect for others. Dictators and other autocratic leaders rely on violence and intimidation to get people to do what they want. That's not really leadership. In contrast, good leaders rely on respect. They understand that all leadership is voluntary. When leaders show respect for others, especially for people who have less power or a lower position than theirs, they gain respect from others, and people want to follow people they respect greatly. Number 3, courage. One thing that caused everyone to respect Harriet Tubman so much was her tremendous courage. She was determined that she was going to succeed, or she was going to die trying. She didn't care about the danger. Her mission was clear, and she was absolutely fearless. Good leaders do what's right, even at the risk of failure, in the face of great danger and under the brunt of relentless criticism. Number 4, success. Success is very attractive. People are naturally drawn to it. People respect others' accomplishments. And it's hard to argue with a good track record. When leaders are successful in their own endeavors, people respect them. When they succeed in leading the team to victory, then followers believe they can do it again. As a result, followers follow them because they want to be part of success in the future. Number 5, loyalty. We live in an era of free agency. Professional athletes hop from team to team looking for the best deal. CEOs negotiate ridiculously high financial packages and then bail out as millionaires when things go wrong. The average worker, according to one source, will change occupations 10 times by the time he reaches age 36. In a culture of constant change, turnover, and transition, loyalty is an asset. When leaders stick with the team until the job is done, remain loyal to the organization when the going gets tough, and look out for the followers even when it hurts them, followers respect them and their actions. If you want to measure how much respect you have as a leader, the first thing you should do is to look at who you attract. The second thing you should do is to see how your people respond when you ask for commitment or change. When leaders are respected and they ask for commitment, their people step up and sign up. They are ready to take risk, charge the hill, put in long hours, or do whatever else is necessary to get the job done. Likewise, when respected leaders ask for change, followers are willing to embrace it. But when leaders who are not respected ask for commitment or change, people doubt, they question, they make excuses, or they simply walk away. It's very hard for a leader who hasn't earned respect to get other people to follow. In October of 1997, college basketball saw the retirement of a great leader, someone who engendered respect as he spent more than 30 years of his life pouring himself into others. His name is Dean Smith, and he was the head basketball coach at the University of North Carolina. His leadership not only won games in the respect of his players, but also helped produce a remarkable 49 men who went on to play professional basketball. Included in that list are greats such as Bob McAdoo, James Worthy, and of course Michael Jordan. Not only one of the best players ever to dribble a basketball, but also a fine leader in his own right. Michael Jordan understood what it meant to follow a good leader. During the waning years of his career, he was adamant about his desire to play for only one coach, Phil Jackson, the man he believes is the best in the business. It made sense. A leader like Jordan wanted to follow a strong leader, one stronger than himself. That's the law of respect. It's just possible that Jordan's desire got its seed when the young North Carolinian, still developing, was being led and mentored by his strong coach, Dean Smith. If you ever become frustrated because the people you want to follow you are reluctant to, it very well may be that you are trying to lead people whose leadership is stronger than yours. That creates a difficult situation. If you're a 7 as a leader, 8s, 9s, and 10s aren't likely to follow you, no matter how compelling your vision is or how well thought out a plan you devised. So what can you do about it? become a better leader. There's always hope for a leader who wants to grow. People who are naturally a 7 may never become a 10, but they can become a 9. There's always room to grow. And the more you grow, the better the people you will attract. Why? Because people naturally follow leaders stronger than themselves. Law number 8, the law of intuition. Leaders evaluate everything with a leadership bias. Because I'm a communicator and do a lot of public speaking, people occasionally want to hear from my wife, Margaret, and she gets invited to speak at an event. As the date approaches, Margaret works on her presentation and puts together her notes, but we inevitably end up having a conversation something like this. "John, how do you think I should start?" she asks. "It depends," I answer. That's not much help. "Margaret, I'm not trying to be difficult. Every speaking situation is different." "Okay, but what would you do?" "Well, I'd go out and talk to many of the attendees before the event started to try to get a feel for who they are. Just check out the room. And I'd listen to what the host said and to the people who spoke before me to get an idea if I should play off something they said that happened earlier. I'd find a way to really connect with the audience." "That doesn't help me," she answers in frustration. To be honest, her questions frustrate me as much as my answers frustrate her. I have a hard time explaining what I would do because communication is intuitive for me. It's one of my greatest strengths. Now, I'm not picking on Margaret. She's more highly talented than I am in so many areas. To give you an idea, when I'm getting ready to speak at an event and I'm trying to pick out my clothes, I'm worthless. One of two things usually happens. I stand in the closet paralyzed and drooling, totally incapable of figuring out what goes together, or I pick something out, put it on, go into the bedroom, and Margaret says, "Oh, John, you're not going to wear that, are you?" Well, of course not," I answer. "What do you think I should wear?" At that, Margaret strolls into the closet and looks around for about 2 seconds. "I haven't seen you in this jacket yet, so how about this?" she says as she starts grabbing things, "and if you wear this shirt, this tie, it will really pop." As she picks the slacks, I try to be helpful and pick out shoes. "No, you can't wear those shoes with this," she says. "Here, wear these with this belt." When I'm at the event, I hear compliments about how I'm dressed, so when I return home, I hang the whole outfit together in the closet because I know it goes together. Then the next time I get ready to leave for a speaking engagement, I put it on and walk confidently in the bedroom. Margaret says, "You can't wear that again," and off we go through the whole routine one more time. You see, people born with natural leadership ability are especially strong in the area of leadership intuition. Others have to work hard to develop and hone it. But either way, intuition comes from two things: the combination of natural ability, which comes in a person's areas of strength, and learned skills. It is an informed intuition, and it causes leadership issues to jump out to a leader in a way that they don't with others. I regard leadership intuition as the ability of a leader to read what's going on. For that reason, I say that leaders are readers. Leaders are readers of their situation. In all kinds of circumstances, leaders pick up on details that might elude others. They tune in to leadership dynamics. Many leaders describe this as an ability to smell things in their organization. They can sense people's attitudes. They are able to detect the chemistry of a team. They can tell when things are humming and when they're winding down or getting ready to grind to a halt. They don't need to sift through stats, read reports, or examine a balance sheet. They know the situation before they have all the facts. That is a result of their leadership intuition. Leaders are readers of trends. Most followers are focused on their current work. They think in terms of task at hand, projects, or specific goals. That is as it should be. Most managers are concerned with efficiency and effectiveness. They often possess a broader view than employees, thinking in terms of weeks, months, or even years. But leaders take an even broader view. They look years, even decades ahead. Their intuition tells them that something is happening, that conditions are changing, and that trouble or opportunity is coming. Leaders must always be a few steps ahead of their best people, or they're not really leading. They can do that only if they are able to read trends. Leaders are readers of their resources. A good worker encounters a challenge and thinks, "What can I do to help?" A high achiever asks, "How can I solve this problem?" A peak performer wonders, "What must I do to reach the next level so that I can overcome this?" Leaders see a challenge, problem, or opportunity, and they think, "Who is the best person to take this on? What resources, raw materials, technology, information, and so forth do we possess that will help us? What will this take financially? How can I encourage my team to achieve success?" Leaders see everything with a leadership bias. Their focus is on mobilizing people and leveraging resources to achieve their goals rather than on using their own individual efforts. Leaders who want to succeed maximize every asset and resource that they have for the benefit of their organization. For that reason, they are continually aware of what they have at their disposal. Leaders are readers of people. President Lyndon Johnson once said that when you walk into a room, you don't belong in politics if you can't tell who's for you and who's against you. Reading people is perhaps the most important intuitive skill leaders can possess. After all, if what you are doing doesn't involve people, it's not leadership. And if you aren't persuading people to follow, then you're not leading. Leaders are readers of themselves. Finally, good leaders develop the ability to read themselves. Leaders must know not only their own strengths and blind spots, skills and weaknesses, but also their current state of mind. Why? Because leaders can hinder progress just as easily as they can help create it. In fact, it's easier to damage an organization than it is to build one. We've all seen excellent organizations that took generations to build begin falling apart in a matter of years. Whenever leaders face a problem, they automatically measure it and begin solving it using the law of intuition. They evaluate everything with a leadership bias. For example, leadership intuition came into play in the recent years at Apple Computer. Just about everybody knows the success story of Apple. The company was created in 1976 by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in a garage. Just 4 years later, the business went public, opening at $22 a share and selling 4.6 million shares. It made more than 40 employees and investors millionaires overnight. But Apple's story hasn't been all positive. Since those early years, Apple's success, stock value, and ability to capture customers have fluctuated wildly. Jobs left Apple in 1985, having been pushed out in the battle with CEO John Sculley, the former Pepsi president whom Jobs had recruited in 1983. Sculley was followed by Michael Spindler in 1993 and then Gilbert Amelio in 1996. None of them was able to reestablish Apple's previous success. In its glory days, Apple had sold 14.6% of all personal computers in the United States. By 1997, sales were down to 3.5%. That was when Apple again looked to the leadership of its original founder, Steve Jobs, for help. The failing company believed he could save it. Jobs intuitively reviewed the situation, and immediately he took action. He knew that improvement was impossible without a change in leadership, so he quickly dismissed all but 2 of the previous board members and installed new ones. He made changes in the executive leadership, and he fired the company's ad agency and held a competition for the account among 3 firms. He also refocused the company. Jobs wanted to get back to the basics of what Apple had always done best, use its individuality to create products that made a difference. At the time, Jobs said, "We've reviewed the roadmaps of new products and axed more than 70% of the projects, keeping the 30% that were gems. Plus, we're adding new ones that are a whole new paradigm of looking at computers." None of those actions was especially surprising, but Jobs also did something that really showed the law of intuition in action. He read Apple's situation and made a leadership decision that went absolutely against the grain of Apple's previous thinking. It was an incredible, intuitive leadership leap. Jobs created a strategic alliance with the man whom Apple employees considered to be their arch-enemy, Bill Gates. Jobs explained, "I called Bill and said Microsoft and Apple should work more closely together, but we have this issue to resolve, this intellectual property dispute. Let's resolve it." They negotiated a deal quickly which settled Apple's lawsuit against Microsoft. Gates promised to pay off Apple and invest $150 million in non-voting stock. That cleared the way for future partnership and brought much-needed capital to the company. It was something only an intuitive leader would have done. Apple's stock value immediately went up 33%, and in time, Apple regained some of the prestige it had lost over the years. In 2001, Jobs made another leadership move based on his intuition. While other computer manufacturers were pursuing PDAs, he was looking at music. And when an independent contractor and hardware expert named Tony Fadell approached Apple with an idea for an MP3 player and a music sales company, Apple embraced it, even though several other companies had rejected it. Fadell was hired on, and they began working on what would eventually be known as the iPod. Jobs' involvement with the iPod is an indication of his leadership intuition. Ben Knowles, who was on the inside of the project, said, "The interesting thing about the iPod is that since it started, it had 100% of Steve Jobs' time. Not many projects get that. He was heavily involved in every single aspect of the project." Why did Jobs do that? Because his intuition as a leader made him understand the impact that the device could make. It was consistent with his vision for creating a digital lifestyle. Jobs has been right on. Sales have been phenomenal and have exceeded the company's computer sales. Apple was making a profit while other technology companies suffered. By spring of 2002, Apple had shipped more than 10 million units. By the end of 2005, Apple possessed 75% of the world's market for digital music players. Jobs' story is a reminder that leadership really is more art than science. The principles of leadership are constant, but the application changes with every leader and every situation. That's why it requires intuition. Without it, leaders get blindsided, and that's one of the worst things that can happen to a leader. If you want to lead long, lead well, and stay ahead of others, you've got to obey the law of intuition. Law number 9, the law of magnetism. Who you are is who you attract. Effective leaders are always on the lookout for good people. I think each of us carries around a mental list of what kind of people we would like to have in our organization or department. Think about it. Do you know who you're looking for right now? What is your profile of perfect employees? What qualities would they possess? Would you want them to be aggressive or entrepreneurial? Are you looking for leaders? Do you care whether they are in their 20s, 40s, or 60s? What will determine whether the people you want are the people you get, whether they will possess the qualities that you desire? You may be surprised by the answer. Believe it or not, who you attract is not determined by what you want. It's determined by who you are. In most situations, unless you take strong measures to counteract it, you draw people to you who possess the same qualities that you do. That's the law of magnetism. Who you are is who you attract. When I was a kid, my mother used to tell me that birds of a feather flock together. I thought that was a wise saying when I was spending time with my older brother Larry and playing ball. He was a good athlete, so I figured that made me one too. As I grew up, I think I instinctively recognized that good students spent time with good students, people who only wanted to play stuck together, and so on. But I don't think I really understood the impact of the law of magnetism until I moved to San Diego, California, and became the leader of the last church that I pastored. My predecessor at Skyline Church was Dr. Orville Butcher. He is a wonderful man with many admirable qualities. One of his best is his musicianship. He plays piano and has a beautiful Irish tenor voice even today in his 80s. At the time I arrived in 1981, Skyline had a solid reputation for fine music and was nationally known for its outstanding musical productions. In fact, the church was filled with talented musicians and vocalists. Why were there so many exceptional musicians at Skyline? The answer lies in the law of magnetism. People with musical talent were naturally attracted to Dr. Butcher. They respected him and understood him. They shared his motivation, his values. They were on the same page with him. Leaders helped to shape the culture of their organizations based on who they are and what they do. Music was valued. It was practiced and performed with excellence. It was used to reach out to the community. It was deeply ingrained in the culture of the organization. In contrast, I enjoy music, but I am not a musician. After I came on board at the church, the number of new musicians arriving at the church declined quickly. But do you know what kind of people started coming instead? Leaders. I valued leadership, modeled it, trained people in it, and rewarded it. Leadership was woven into the fabric of the organization. By the time I left Skyline, not only was the church filled with hundreds of excellent leaders, but the church had raised up and sent out hundreds of leaders. The reason was the law of magnetism. Our organization became a magnet for people with leadership ability. If you have recruited and hired a staff, you will probably find that you and the people who follow you share common ground in several of these key areas. Generation. Most organizations reflect the characteristics of their key leaders, and that includes their age. During the dot-com boom of the 1990s, thousands of companies were founded by people in their 20s and early 30s. And who did they hire? Others in their 20s and 30s. In just about any type of organization, most of the time, the people who come on board are similar in age to the leaders who hire them. Often that occurs within departments. Sometimes it occurs company-wide. Attitude. Rarely have I seen positive and negative people attracted to one another. People who view life as a series of opportunities and exciting challenges don't want to hear others talk about how bad things are all the time. I know that's true for me. And not only do people attract others with similar attitudes, but their attitudes tend to become alike. Attitude is one of the most contagious qualities a human being possesses. People with good attitudes tend to make people around them feel more positive. Those with a terrible attitude tend to bring others down. Background. One of Theodore Roosevelt's memorable accomplishments is his daring charge up San Juan Hill with the Rough Riders during the Spanish-American War. Roosevelt personally recruited that all-volunteer cavalry company, and it was said to be a remarkably peculiar group of people. It was comprised primarily of two types of men, wealthy aristocrats from the Northeast and cowboys from the Wild West. Why? Because Roosevelt was an aristocratic-born, Harvard-educated New Yorker who turned himself into a real-life cowboy and big-game hunter in the Dakotas of the West. He was a strong and genuine leader in both worlds, and as a result, he attracted both kinds of people. People attract and are attracted to others of similar background. Blue-collar workers tend to stick together. Employers tend to hire people of their same race. People with education tend to respect and value others who also are well-educated. This natural magnetism is so strong that organizations that value diversity have to fight against it. Values. People are attracted to leaders whose values are similar to their own. Think about the people who flocked to President John F. Kennedy after he was elected in 1960. He was a young idealist who wanted to change the world, and he attracted people with a similar profile. When he formed the Peace Corps and called people to service, saying, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country," thousands of young, idealistic people stepped forward to answer the challenge. It doesn't matter whether the shared values are positive or negative. Either way, the attraction is equally strong. Think about someone like Adolf Hitler. He was a very strong leader, as you can judge by his level of influence, but his values were rotten to the core. What kind of people did he attract? Leaders with similar values, all utterly evil men. The law of magnetism is powerful. Whatever character you possess is what you will likely find in the people who follow you. Energy. It's a good thing that people with similar levels of energy are attracted to one another, because when you pair a high-energy person with a low-energy person and ask them to work closely together, they can drive one another crazy. The high-energy person thinks the low-energy one is lazy, and the low-energy person thinks the high-energy one is insane. Giftedness. People do not go out looking for mediocre leaders to follow. People are attracted to talent and excellence, especially in their area of giftedness. They are most likely to respect and follow someone who possesses their kind of talent. Business people want to follow bosses with skill in building an organization and making a profit. Football players want to follow coaches with great football talent. Creative people want to follow leaders who are willing to think outside the box. Like attracts like. That may seem pretty obvious, yet I've met many leaders who expected highly talented people to follow them, even though they neither possess nor express value for those people's giftedness. As you listen to this chapter, you may find yourself in one of two situations. You may be saying to yourself, I'm not crazy about people I'm attracting. Am I stuck with my situation? The answer is no. If you are dissatisfied with the leadership ability of the people that you are attracting, then embrace the law of process and work to increase your leadership skill. If you want to grow an organization, grow the leader. If you find the people you attract to be unreliable or untrustworthy, then examine your character. Developing stronger character can be a more difficult road, but the payoff is huge. Good character improves every aspect of a person's life. On the other hand, you may be saying, I like who I am, and I like the kind of people I attract. That's great. Now take the next step in effective leadership. Work at recruiting people who are different from you to staff your weaknesses. If you don't, important organizational tasks are likely to be overlooked, and the organization will suffer as a result. An organization will never fulfill its potential if everyone in it is a visionary, or if everyone is an accountant. It is possible for a leader to go out and recruit people unlike himself, but those are not the people he will naturally attract. Attracting people unlike yourself requires a high degree of intentionality. To succeed at it, people must believe in you, and the vision you share must be compelling. Who you are is who you attract. That is the law of magnetism. If you want to attract better people, become the kind of person you desire to attract. Law number 10, the law of connection. Leaders touch a heart before they ask for a hand. There are incidents in the lives and careers of leaders that become defining moments for their leadership. In the perception of followers, the general public, and historians, those moments often represent who those leaders are and what they stand for. Here's an example of what I mean. I believe the presidency of George W. Bush can be summed up by two defining moments that he experienced during his time of office. The first moment occurred early in his first term, and it defined that entire term in office. Just 4 days after the collapse of the World Trade Center towers, Bush went to Ground Zero. He spent time there with the firefighters, police officers, and rescue workers. He shook hands, he listened. He took in the devastation. He thanked the people working there and told them, "The nation sends its love and compassion to everybody who's here." Reports said that the spirits of the tired searchers lifted when the president arrived and started shaking hands. Cameras captured Bush standing in the wreckage with his arm around firefighter Bob Beckwith. When some members of the crowd shouted that they couldn't hear him, Bush called back, "I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon." The people cheered. They felt validated. They felt understood. Bush had connected with them in a way no one had seen him do prior to that moment. The second incident came during Bush's second 4 years in office, and it defined that second term. It occurred on August 31, 2005, just 2 days after the landfall of Hurricane Katrina. After the levees in New Orleans broke and the water flooded into the city, instead of visiting the city as he did in New York after 9/11, Bush flew over New Orleans in Air Force One, peering through one of the jet's small windows to see the damage. To the people on the Gulf Coast, it was a picture of indifference. After the worst of the tragedy was over, no matter what President Bush said or how much help he provided, he was unable to regain the people's confidence and trust. He had failed to connect with the people. He had broken the law of connection. For leaders to be effective, they need to connect with people. Why? Because you first have to touch people's hearts before you can ask for their hand. That is the law of connection. All great leaders and communicators recognize this truth and act on it almost instinctively. You can't move people to action unless you first move them with emotion. An outstanding orator and African-American leader of the 19th century was Frederick Douglass. It's said that he had a remarkable ability to connect with people and move their hearts when he spoke. Historian Luron Bennett said of Douglass, he could make people laugh at a slave owner preaching the duties of Christian obedience, could make them see the humiliation of a black maiden ravished by a brutal slave owner, could make them hear the sobs of a mother separated from her child. Through him, people could cry, curse, and feel. Through him, they could live slavery. Good leaders work at connecting with others all the time, whether they are communicating to an entire organization or working with a single individual. The stronger the relationship you form with followers, the greater the connection you forge, and the more likely those followers will be to want to help you. I used to tell my staff, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. They would groan because they heard me say it so much, but they recognized that it was true nonetheless. You develop credibility with people when you connect with them and show that you genuinely care and want to help them. And as a result, they usually respond in kind and want to help you. How do you connect? Whether you're speaking in front of a large audience or chatting in the hallway with an individual, the guidelines are the same. Communicate with openness and sincerity. People can smell a phony a mile away. Legendary NFL coach Bill Walsh observed, nothing is more effective than sincere, accurate praise, and nothing more lame than a cookie-cutter compliment. Authentic leaders connect. Know your audience. When you work with individuals, knowing your audience means learning their names, finding out about their histories, asking about their dreams. When you communicate to an audience, you learn about the organization and its goals. You want to speak to what they care about, not just what you care about. Live your message. Perhaps the most important thing you can do as a leader and communicator is to practice what you preach. That's where credibility comes from. Plenty of people out in the marketplace are willing to say one thing to an audience, but to do something else. They don't last. Go where they are. As a communicator, I dislike any kind of barrier to communication. I don't like to be too far from my audience or too high above them on stage. And I definitely don't want any physical barriers between me and the people. But a person's method of communication can also be a barrier. Whether I'm speaking from a stage or sitting across from someone in my office, I try to speak the other person's language to go to that person. I try to be attuned to others' culture, background, education, and so on. I adapt to others. I don't expect them to adapt to me. Focus on them, not yourself. If you go on an elevator with me and ask me to tell you the secret to good communication before I got off the next floor, I'd tell you to focus on others, not yourself. That is the number one problem of inexperienced speakers, and it is also the number one problem of ineffective leaders. You will always connect faster when your focus is not on yourself. Believe in them. It's one thing to communicate to people because you believe you have something of value to say. It's another thing to communicate with people because you believe they have value. People's opinion of us has less to do with what they see in us than it does with what we can help them see in themselves. Some leaders have problems with the law of connection because they believe that connecting is the responsibility of the followers. That is especially true of positional leaders. They often think I'm the boss. I have the position. These are my employees. Let them come to me. But successful leaders who obey the law of connection are always initiators. They take the first step with others and then make the effort to continue building relationships. That's not always easy, but it's important to the success of the organization. A leader has to do it no matter how many obstacles there might be. I learned this lesson in 1972 when I was faced with a very difficult situation. I was moving to Lancaster, Ohio to accept the leadership of a church there. It was going to be a big step up in responsibility for me. And before I accepted the position, I learned that the church had just gone through a big battle relating to a building project. Heading up one of the factions was the number one influence in the church, a man named Jim. I also heard that Jim had the reputation for being negative and somewhat of a maverick. He liked to use his influence to move the people in directions that didn't always help the organization. Because the previous leader of the church had faced opposition from Jim more than a few times, I knew that I needed to win him over. Otherwise, I would always have conflict with him. If you want someone on your side, don't try to convince them. Connect with him. That's what I determined to do. So the first thing I did when I got to my new position was to make an appointment to meet Jim in my office. Jim, I said, as he sat in my office, I know you're the influencer in this church, and I want you to know that I've decided I'm going to do everything in my power to build a good relationship with you. I'd like to meet with you every Tuesday for lunch at the Holiday Inn to talk through issues. While I'm the leader here, I'll never take any decision to the people without first discussing it with you. I really want to work with you. But I also want you to know that I've heard you're a negative person. I continued, and that you like to fight battles. If you decide to work against me, I'll guess we'll just have to be on opposite sides. And because you have so much influence, I know that you'll win most of the time, at least in the beginning. But I'm going to develop relationships with people and draw new people to this church. This church will grow, and someday I'll have greater influence than you. But I don't want to battle you, I confided. You're 65 years old right now. Let's say you've got another 10 to 15 years of good health and productivity ahead of you. If you want, you can make these years your very best and make your life count. We can do a lot of great things together in this church, I summed up, but the decision is yours. When I finished, Jim didn't say a word. He got up from his seat, walked into the hall, and stopped to take a drink at the water fountain. I followed him out, and I waited. I didn't know whether he was going to dress me down, declare war, or tell me to take a hike. After a long time, Jim stood up straight and turned around. When he did, I could see that tears were rolling down his cheeks. And then he gave me a great big bear hug and said, "You can count on me to be on your side." And Jim did get on my side. As it turned out, he did live another 10 years, and because he was willing to help me, a young kid with a vision, we accomplished many positive things together. But it never would have happened if I hadn't had the courage to try to make a connection with him that first day in my office. One of the companies I admire is Southwest Airlines. The company has been successful and profitable while other airlines have filed for bankruptcy and folded. The person responsible for the initial success of the organization and the creation of its culture is Herb Kelleher, the company's founder and current executive chairman of the board. I love what Southwest employees did on Boss's Day in 1994 because it shows the kind of connection Kelleher made with his people. They took out a full-page ad in USA Today and addressed the following message to Kelleher. Thanks, Herb, for remembering every one of our names, for supporting the Ronald McDonald House, for helping load baggage on Thanksgiving, for giving everyone a kiss, and we mean everyone, for listening, for running the only profitable major airline, for singing at our holiday party, for singing only once a year, for letting us wear shorts and sneakers to work, for golfing at the Love Classic with only one club, for out-talking Sam Donaldson, for riding your Harley-Davidson into Southwest headquarters, for being a friend, not just a boss. Happy Boss's Day from each one of your 16,000 employees. A display of affection like that occurs only when a leader has worked hard to connect with his people. Don't ever underestimate the importance of building relational bridges between yourself and the people you lead. There's an old saying, to lead yourself, use your head. To lead others, use your heart. That's the nature of the law of connection. Always touch a person's heart before you ask him for a hand. Law number 11. The law of the inner circle. A leader's potential is determined by those closest to him. When we see any incredibly gifted person, it is always tempting to believe that talent alone made him successful. To think that is to buy into a lie. Nobody does anything great alone. Leaders do not succeed alone. A leader's potential is determined by those closest to him. What makes the difference is the leader's inner circle. Lance Armstrong is one of the most talented athletes on the planet. Because of his physical gifts, he has been called a freak of nature. His sport, cycling, is perhaps the most grueling. The Tour de France, which he has won an astounding 7 times in a row, has been compared to running 20 marathons on 20 consecutive days. Clearly, Armstrong is in a class that few others can approach. His determination is unquestionable. His training regimen is unmatched. His talent is extraordinary, yet without a team, he would not have won a single Tour title. Cycling is truly a team sport, though it may not seem that way to the casual observer. During his Tour de France run, Armstrong had an incredible team. Anchoring the team was Chris Carmichael, his coach, and Johan Brunel, an ex-cyclist, who functioned as the team's sports director and master tactician. Both men were indispensable, since Armstrong tended at first to follow his own less efficient training regimen and execute his own tactics, causing him to lose badly. But once those 2 inner circle members were in place, Armstrong began to maximize his gift. Lance is the first to say he would have never won the Tour de France without the help of his teammates, explains the Team Discovery website. Every other rider sacrifices individual glory at the race in order to work for one rider, Lance, which says a lot considering what's at stake. Yet over the years, Lance delivered every single time following the work of his team, so it goes hand in hand. If the team sacrificed itself and Lance didn't have what it took to come through in the end, we would have to rethink the plan. Leaders have to deliver. There is no substitute for performance. But without a good team, they often don't get the opportunity. Their potential is determined by those closest to them. That is the law of the inner circle. In recent years, people in the business world have rediscovered the significance of teams. In the 1980s, the buzzword in business circles was management. Then in the 1990s, the emphasis was on leadership. Now in the 21st century, the emphasis is on team leadership. Why? Because nobody does everything well. I would have loved to compile fewer than 21 laws of leadership. But when I boil leadership down to its essence, I still see 21 things a leader must do well to lead effectively. However, at the same time, I also recognize that no single leader can do all 21 things well. That's why every leader needs a team of people. As Mother Teresa observed, you can do what I cannot do. I can do what you cannot do. Together, we can do great things. That is the power of the law of the inner circle. Most people create an inner circle of people. However, they are usually not strategic in doing so. We naturally tend to surround ourselves with either people we like or people with whom we are comfortable. Few people give enough thought to how those closest to them impact their effectiveness or leadership potential. You see it all the time with certain athletes who transition to the professional ranks and entertainers who achieve success professionally. Some self-destruct and never reach their potential, and it can often be attributed to the kind of people they spend their time with. To practice the law of the inner circle, you must be intentional in your relationship building. As you consider whether individuals should be in your inner circle, ask yourself the following questions. 1. Do they have high influence with others? One key to successful leadership is the ability to influence the people who influence others. How do you do that? By drawing influencers into your inner circle. That's what I did with Jim at the church in Lancaster, Ohio, whom I wrote about in The Law of Connection. Jim was the single most influential person in the organization when I arrived. By building a relationship with Jim and taking him into my inner circle, I was doing two things. First, I was exerting my influence on him, sharing my values, vision, and philosophy of leadership with him. I wanted him to be a carrier of the vision to other people in the organization. Second, I was finding out what he thought. If he had questions or objections to what I wanted to do, I was able to find out about it immediately and work through it with him. And because he had so many years of experience with the people in the organization, he often helped me to navigate around potential landmines I knew nothing about. Number 2, do they bring a complementary gift to the table? Because of my leadership gifting, I naturally attract leaders, and I'm also highly attracted to leaders. But one of the best things I have done in my leadership career is to bring a few key people into my inner circle who possess strengths in my areas of weakness. One of those people is Linda Eggers, my assistant. I advise young executives that their first and most important hire should be their assistant. In Linda, I have an absolute gem. She's been working with me for 20 years. She has an incredible mind for detail. She is tireless, and like Radar O'Reilly from MASH, she has the ability to anticipate what I need before I realize it. What's more, she now knows me so well that she can speak to others on my behalf, knowing how I would answer questions at least 90% of the time. Number 3, do they add value to me and to the organization? I discussed in The Law of Addition how people add, subtract, multiply, or divide when it comes to others. The people in your inner circle must be adders or multipliers. They should have a proven track record as assets to the organization. There is a poem by Ella Wheeler Wilcox that my mother used to recite to me when I was growing up. There are two kinds of people on earth today, just two kinds of people, no more, I say, not the good and the bad, for 'tis well understood the good are half bad and the bad are half good. No, just two kinds of people on earth, I mean, are the people who lift and the people who lean. Look only for lifters for your inner circle. Inner circle members should also add value to you personally. That's not selfish. If they have a negative effect, they will hinder your ability to lead well, and that can hurt your people and the organization. Number 4, do they positively impact other inner circle members? I'm a big believer in team chemistry, and if your inner circle is going to work together and function as a team, then you need to take into account how members interact. First, you want them to have a good fit with one another. Just as members of a championship basketball team have complementary skills and compatible roles, you want each inner circle member to have a place in your life where he contributes without stepping on the other's toes. Second, you want inner circle members to make one another better, to raise one another's game. Sometimes that comes because they encourage one another. Sometimes it happens when they help one another by sharing information and wisdom. And sometimes it comes from friendly competition. No matter how it happens, if they improve the ability of other team members, they also improve your leaders. No leader starts out with a strong inner circle. When leaders take on new positions, they often have to build their inner circle from scratch. That was the case for me in 1981 when I accepted the offer to lead Skyline Church in San Diego, California. The church had a great history and nationally recognized reputation. It had been founded in the 1950s by Orville Butcher, a wonderful man who was retiring after serving there for 27 years. Dr. Butcher had touched the lives of thousands of people with his leadership. It was a good church, but it did have one problem. It had not grown in years. One of the first things I did after taking the job was to meet with each staff member to assess individual abilities. Almost immediately I discovered why the church had flatlined. The staff members were good people, but they were not strong leaders. No matter what I did with them, they would never be able to take the organization to the place we needed to go. In a church of that size, the staff is the leader's inner circle. If the staff is strong, then the leader can make a huge impact, but if the staff is weak, he can't. That's the law of the inner circle. The task that lay ahead of me was clear. I needed to remove the weak leaders and bring in better ones. That was the only way I would be able to turn the situation around. Mentally, I divided the people into 3 groups according to their ability to lead and deliver results. The bottom third I dismissed right away and began replacing them with the best people I could find. Then I began working on the middle third, and then what had been the top. The organization immediately began growing. By the end of 3 years, all but 2 of the original staff had been replaced by better leaders. Because the inner circle had gone to a new level, the organization was able to also go to a new level. Over the years, we tripled in size from 1,000 to more than 3,300 weekly attenders. The growth and success we experienced at Skyline were due to the law of the inner circle. When we had the right staff, our potential skyrocketed, and in 1995, when I left, other leaders from around the country sought to hire my key staff members for their organizations. They recognized the power of the law of the inner circle and wanted to hire the very best they could find to boost their potential. A leader's potential is determined by those closest to him. That's the law of the inner circle. That's the only way you can reach the highest level possible. Law number 12, the law of empowerment. Only secure leaders give power to others. Nearly everyone has heard of Henry Ford, the revolutionary automobile industry innovator and legend in American business history. In 1903, he co-founded the Ford Motor Company, with the belief that the future of the automobile lay in putting it within reach of the average American worker. The Model T changed the face of the 20th century American life. By 1914, Ford was producing nearly 50% of all automobiles in the United States. The Ford Motor Company looked like an American success story. However, all of Ford's story is not about positive achievement, and one reason is that he didn't embrace the law of empowerment. Henry Ford was the antithesis of an empowering leader. He continually undermined his leaders and looked over the shoulders of his people. He even created a sociological department within Ford Motor Company to check up on his employees and direct their private lives. As time went by, he became more and more eccentric. He once went into his accounting office and tossed the company's books into the street, saying, "Just put all the money we take in a big barrel, and when a shipment of material comes in, reach into the barrel and take out enough money to pay for it." Perhaps Ford's most peculiar dealings were with his executives, especially his son Edsel. The younger Ford had worked at the company since he was a boy. As Henry became more eccentric, Edsel worked harder to keep the company going. If it weren't for Edsel, the Ford Motor Company probably would have gone out of business in the 1930s. Henry eventually gave Edsel the presidency of the company, but at the same time he undermined his son. Further, whenever a promising leader was rising up in the company, Henry tore him down. As a result, the company kept losing its best executives. The few who stayed did so because they figured that someday old Henry would die and Edsel would finally take over and set things right. But that's not what happened. In 1943, Edsel died at the age of 49. Edsel's oldest son, the 26-year-old Henry Ford II, quickly left the Navy so that he could return to Dearborn, Michigan, and take over the company. Young Henry was taking over a company that hadn't made a profit in 15 years. At that time, it was losing $1 million a day. The young president knew he was in over his head, so he sent out to find leaders. Fortunately, the first group actually approached him. Colonel Charles Tex Thornton headed a team of 10 men who had worked together at the War Department during World War II. Their contribution to the Ford Motor Company was substantial. In the years to come, the group produced 6 company vice presidents and 2 presidents. The second influx of leadership came with the entrance of Ernie Breech, an experienced General Motors executive and the former president of Bendix Aviation. Young Henry hired him to be Ford's executive vice president, a position second to Henry's, with the expectation that he would take command and turn the company around. He succeeded. Breech quickly brought in more than 150 outstanding executives from General Motors, and by 1949, Ford Motor Company was on a roll again. In that year, the company sold more than 1 million Fords, Mercurys, and Lincolns, the best sales since the Model A. If Henry Ford II had lived by the law of empowerment, the Ford Motor Company might have grown enough to eventually overtake General Motors and become the #1 car company again. But only secure leaders are able to give power to others, and Henry felt threatened. The success of Tex Thornton, Ernie Breach, and Louis Crusoe, a legendary GM executive whom Breach had brought into the company, made Henry worry about his own place at Ford. His position was based not on influence but on his name and his family's control of the company's stock. What was Henry's solution? He began pitting one top executive against another. Any time an executive gained power and influence, Henry undercut the person's authority by moving him to a position with less clout, supporting the executive's subordinates, or publicly humiliating him. This maneuver continued all the days Henry II was at Ford. As one Ford president, Lee Iacocca, commented after leaving the company, "Henry Ford, as I would learn firsthand, had a nasty habit of getting rid of strong leaders." Iacocca says that Henry Ford II once described his leadership philosophy to him years before Iacocca himself became its target. Ford said, "If a guy works for you, don't let him get too comfortable. Don't let him get too cozy or set in his ways. Always do the opposite of what he expects. Keep your people anxious and off balance." Both Henry Fords failed to abide by the law of empowerment. Rather than identifying leaders, building them up, giving them resources, authority, and responsibility, and turning them loose to achieve, they alternately encouraged and undermined their best people. To lead others well, we must help them to reach their potential. That means being on their side, encouraging them, giving them power, and helping them to succeed. That's not traditionally what we're taught about leadership. What were the two leadership games we were taught as kids? King of the Hill and Follow the Leader. What was the object of King of the Hill? To knock other people down so that you could be the leader. And what was the point in Follow the Leader? You do the things you know followers can't do to separate yourself from them and make yourself look more powerful. The problem with these games is that to win, you have to make all the other people lose. The games are based on insecurity and are opposite of the way to raise up leaders. When I travel to developing countries, I am made especially aware of how alien the idea of empowerment can be to emerging leaders. In cultures where you have to fight to make something of yourself, the assumption often is that you need to fight others to maintain your leadership. But that reflects a scarcity mindset. The truth is that if you give some of your power away to others, there is still plenty to go around. When I teach the law of empowerment in emerging countries, I usually ask a volunteer to come up so that I can show visually what happens when a leader tries to keep others down instead of raising them up. I ask the volunteer to stand in front of me, and I put my hands on his shoulders. Then I begin pushing him down. The lower I want to push him, the more I have to bend down to do it. As I push him lower, I go lower. That's the same way it is in leadership. To keep others down, you have to go down with them. And when you do that, you lose any power to lift others up. When leaders fail to empower others, it's usually due to three main reasons. The #1 barrier to empowerment: desire for job security. Weak leaders worry that if they help subordinates, they will themselves become dispensable. But the truth is that the only way to make yourself indispensable is to make yourself dispensable. In other words, if you're able to continually empower others and help them develop so that they can become capable of taking over your job, you will become so valuable to the organization that you become indispensable. That is the paradox of the law of empowerment. What if I work myself out of a job by empowering others, you may ask, and my superiors don't recognize my contribution? That can happen in the short term. But if you keep raising up leaders and empowering them, you will develop a pattern of achievement, excellence, and leadership that will be recognized and rewarded. If the teams you lead always seem to succeed, people will figure out that you are leading them well. The #2 barrier to empowerment: resistance to change. By its very nature, empowerment brings constant change because it encourages people to grow and innovate. Change is the price of progress. That's not always easy to live with. Most people don't like change. That's a fact. Yet one of the most important responsibilities of leaders is to continually improve their organizations. As a leader, you must train yourself to embrace change, to desire it, to make a way for it. Effective leaders are not only willing to change, they become change agents. The third barrier to empowerment is lack of self-worth. John Pierce observed, "You can't lead a cavalry charge if you think you look funny on a horse." Self-conscious people are rarely good leaders. They focus on themselves, worrying how they look, what others think, whether they are liked. They can't give power to others because they feel that they have no power themselves, and you can't give what you don't have. The best leaders have a strong sense of self-worth. They believe in themselves, their mission, and their people. One of the greatest leaders of the United States was known for his humility and willingness to give his power and authority to others: Abraham Lincoln. The depth of his security as a leader can be seen in the selection of his cabinet. Most presidents pick like-minded allies, but not Lincoln. At a time of turmoil for the country when factions were strong, Lincoln brought together a group of leaders who would bring strength through diversity and mutual challenge. One Lincoln biographer said this of his method: "For a president to select a political rival for a cabinet post was not unprecedented, but deliberately to surround himself with all of his disappointed antagonists seemed to be courting disaster." It was the mark of his sincere intentions that Lincoln wanted the advice of men as strong as himself or stronger. That he entertained no fear of being crushed or overridden by such men revealed either surpassing naiveness or a tranquil confidence in his power of leadership. Lincoln's desire to unify the country was more important than his personal comfort. His strength and self-confidence allowed him to practice the law of empowerment and bring strong leaders into his circle. In June of 1863, Lincoln put the command of the Army of the Potomac into the hands of General George C. Meade. Within hours of Meade's appointment, Lincoln sent a courier to him. The President's message in part said, "Considering the circumstances, no one ever received a more important command, and I cannot doubt that you will fully justify the confidence which the government has reposed in you. You will not be hampered by any minute instructions from these headquarters. Your army is free to act as you deem proper under the circumstances as they arise. All forces within the sphere of your operations will be held subject to your orders." As it turned out, Meade's first significant challenge came as he commanded the army at a small Pennsylvania town named Gettysburg. It was a test he passed with authority. Lincoln's use of the law of empowerment was as consistent as Henry Ford's habit of breaking it. When his generals performed well, Lincoln gave them the credit. When they performed poorly, Lincoln took the blame. Lincoln was able to stand strongly during the war and continually give power to others because of his rock-solid security. You don't have to be a leader of Lincoln's caliber to empower others. The main ingredient for empowering others is a high belief in people. If you believe in others, they will believe in themselves. The truth is that empowerment is powerful, not only for the person being developed, but also for the mentor. Enlarging others makes you larger. That is the law of empowerment. It's an impact you can experience as a leader as long as you are willing to believe in people and give your power away. Law number 13. The law of the picture. People do what people see. Several years ago, filmmaker Steven Spielberg and actor Tom Hanks produced a series of television shows on HBO called Band of Brothers, based on the book of the same name by historian Stephen Ambrose. The 10 episodes chronicled the story of Easy Company, a group of paratroopers from the 101st Airborne who fought during World War II. The men of Easy Company were as tough as soldiers get, and they fought heroically from the invasion of Normandy to the end of the war. The story of Easy Company is a great study in leadership, for the various sergeants, lieutenants, and captains who commanded the men displayed many styles of leadership, both good and bad. When the leadership was good, it made the difference not only in the way the soldiers performed, but in the outcome of their battles and ultimately of the war. From the very first episode of the television series, the contrasting leadership styles were on display. Herbert Sobel, Easy Company's commanding officer during his training, was shown to be a brutal, autocratic leader with a sadistic streak. He drove the men harder than the commander of any other company. He arbitrarily revoked passes and inflicted punishment. But judging from Ambrose's research, Sobel was even worse than he was depicted in the series. Sobel drove the men without mercy, which was fine since he was preparing them for combat. But he didn't push himself the same way, being barely capable of passing the physical test required of paratroopers, nor did he display the high level of confidence that he demanded from everyone else. Ambrose writes about an incident during training that was representative of Sobel's leadership. On one night exercise, Sobel decided to teach his men a lesson. He and Sergeant Evans went sneaking through the company's position to steal rifles from sleeping men. The mission was successful. By daylight, Sobel and Evans had nearly 50 rifles. With great fanfare, Evans called the company together, and Sobel began to tell the men what miserable soldiers they were. What Sobel didn't realize was that the men he was berating weren't his own. He had wandered into the wrong camp and stolen the rifles belonging to Fox Company. Sobel didn't even realize his mistake until the commander of Fox Company came up with 45 of his men. The men who served under Sobel mocked him and undermined him. By the time Easy Company began preparations for the invasion of Normandy, many men were taking bets on which of them would shoot Sobel when they finally got into combat. Fortunately, Sobel was removed from his position as company commander and reassigned before they went into combat. Fortunately, most of Easy Company's leaders were excellent, and one in particular was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and was considered by the men to be the best combat leader in World War II. That person was Dick Winters. He started out as a platoon leader in Easy Company during the training and was promoted to company commander after Normandy, and then to battalion executive officer. He finished his military career with the rank of major. Time after time, Winters helped his men to perform at the highest level, and he always led them in front, setting the example, taking the risk along with his men. Ambrose describes Winters' philosophy of leadership simply as officers go first. Whenever his troops needed to assault an enemy position, Winters was in front leading the charge. One of the most remarkable incidents demonstrating Winters' way of leading by example occurred soon after D-Day on the road to Carleton, a town that Easy Company needed to take from the Germans. As the American paratroopers under his command approached the town, they became pinned down by German machine gun fire. Huddled in ditches on either side of the road, they wouldn't move forward when ordered to. Yet if they didn't move, they would eventually be cut to pieces. Winters tried rallying them. He coaxed them. He kicked them. He ran from one ditch to the other as machine gun bullets flew by. Finally, he jumped into the middle of the road, bullets glancing off the ground near him, and shouted at the men to get moving. Everyone got up and moved forward as one, and they helped to take the town. More than 35 years later, Floyd Talbert, a sergeant at the time, wrote to Winters to comment about the incident. "I'll never forget seeing you in the middle of the road. You were my total inspiration. All my boys felt the same way." People do what people see. That is the law of the picture. When the leaders show the way with the right actions, their followers copy them and succeed. Good leaders are always conscious of the fact that they are setting the example and others are going to do what they do, for better or worse. In general, the better the leader's actions, the better their people's. When times are tough, uncertainty is high, and chaos threatens to overwhelm everyone, followers need a clear picture from their leaders the most. That's when they need a leader who embraces the law of the picture. The living picture they see in their leader produces energy, passion, and motivation to keep going. If you desire to become the best leader you can become, you must not neglect the law of the picture. As you strive to improve as an example to your followers, remember these things. First, followers are always watching what you do. If you are a parent, you have probably already realized that your children are always watching what you do. Say anything you want, but your children learn more from what they see than from anywhere else. As parents, Margaret and I realized this early. No matter what we taught our children, they insisted on behaving like us. How frustrating. Just as children watch their parents and emulate their behavior, so do employees watching their bosses. If the bosses come in late, then employees feel that they can too. If the bosses cut corners, employees cut corners. People do what people see. Secondly, it's easier to teach what's right than to do what's right. One of my earliest challenges as a leader was to raise my living to a level of my teaching. I can still remember the day that I decided that I would not teach anything I did not try to live out. That was a tough decision, but as a young leader I was learning to embrace the law of the picture. Author Norman Vincent Peale stated, "Nothing is more confusing than people who give good advice but set a bad example." I would say a related thought is also true. Nothing is more convincing than people who give good advice and set a good example. Recently, I received calls on the same day from two reporters, one from the Chicago Tribune and the other from USA Today, about teaching ethics in the business arena. Both asked similar questions. They wanted to know if ethics could be taught. My answer was yes. But many of the companies that teach ethics classes had ethics problems, one reporter pushed back. That's because ethics can be instilled in others only if it's taught and modeled for them, I replied. Too many leaders are like bad travel agents. They send people places they have never been. Instead, they should be more like tour guides, taking people places that they have gone and sharing the wisdom of their own experiences. Leadership by example always has a powerful impact on others. One of the leaders I admire is Rudy Giuliani, former mayor of New York City. During his career, first as an attorney working for the United States government and then later as an elected official, Giuliani led by example. He says in his book, Leadership, that he is very aware that what he does sets the tone for those who follow him. You cannot ask those who work for you to do something you are unwilling to do yourself, he states. It's up to you to set a standard of behavior. Giuliani sums up his leadership this way. All my life I have been thinking about how to be a leader, whether it was when I was running the corruption unit of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, then the narcotics unit, or turning around a bankrupt Kentucky coal company after being appointed as receiver, or watching Ronald Reagan, Judge McMahon, and others. I realized later that much of what I was doing in studying these people so closely was preparing. Unconsciously, I was learning how to run things. In other words, he has simply done what he had seen his leaders do throughout his career. He had practiced the law of the picture. Law number 14, the law of buy-in. People buy into the leader, then the vision. When I teach leadership seminars, I field a lot of questions about vision. Invariably, someone will come up to me during a break, give me a brief description of an evolving vision, and then ask me, "Do you think my people will buy into my vision?" My response is always the same. First, tell me this. Do your people buy into you? You see, many people who approach the area of vision and leadership have it all backward. They believe that if the cause is good enough, people will automatically buy into it and follow. But that's not how leadership really works. People don't at first follow worthy causes. They follow worthy leaders who promote causes that they can believe in. People buy into the leader first, then the leader's vision. Having an understanding of that changes your whole approach to leading people. For the person who attends one of my conferences and asks whether his people will follow, the question really becomes, have I given my people reasons to buy into me? If the answer is yes, they will gladly buy that leader's vision. But if the leader has not built credibility with his people, it really doesn't matter how great the vision is. During the .com boom, I read an article in Business Week that profiled entrepreneurs who partnered with venture capitalists in the computer industry. At that time, Silicon Valley in California was full of people who worked in the computer industry for a short time and then tried to start their own companies. Every day, hundreds of them were buzzing around trying to find investors so that they could get their ideas and enterprises off the ground. Most never found backing, but whenever an entrepreneur succeeded once, She found it pretty easy to find money the next time around. Many times the investors weren't even interested in finding out what the entrepreneur's vision was. If they'd bought into the person, then they readily accepted the ideas. The writer of the article interviewed software entrepreneur Judith Estrin and her partner. At that time, they had founded 2 companies. She said that funding her first company took 6 months and countless presentations, even though she had a viable idea and believed in it 100%. But the startup of her second company happened almost overnight. It took only 2 phone calls that lasted mere minutes for her to land $5 million in backing. When the word got out that she was starting her second company, people were dying to give her even more money. She said we had venture capitalists calling us and begging us to take their money. Why had everything changed so drastically for her? Because the law of buy-in. People had bought into her, so they were ready to buy into whatever vision she offered, sight unseen. When followers don't like the leader or the vision, they look for another leader. The only time people will follow a leader they don't like with a vision they don't believe in is when the leader has some kind of leverage. That could be something as sinister as a threat of physical violence or as basic as the ability to withhold a paycheck. If the followers have a choice in the matter, they don't follow. And even if they don't have much of a choice, they start looking for another leader to follow. This is a no-win situation for everyone involved. When followers don't like the leader, but they do like the vision, they look for another leader. You may be surprised by this. Even though people may think a cause is good, if they don't like the leader, they will go out and find another one. That's one reason that coaches change teams so often in professional sports. The vision for any team always stays the same. Everyone wants to win a championship. But the players don't always believe in their leader, and when they don't, what happens? The owners don't fire all the players. They fire the leader and bring in someone they hope the players will buy into. The talent level of most professional coaches is similar. The effectiveness of their systems isn't much different. What often separates them is their leadership and their level of credibility with players. When followers like the leader but not the vision, they change the vision. When followers don't agree with their leader's vision, they react in many ways. Sometimes they work to convince their leader to change the vision. Sometimes they abandon their point of view and adopt their leader's. Other times they find a compromise. But as long as they buy into the leader, they rarely out-and-out reject him. They will keep following. An excellent example occurred in Great Britain. Tony Blair had a long tenure in office as Prime Minister. He was a popular leader elected to serve 3 terms. Yet at the same time, the majority of people in Great Britain were against Blair's policies of involving the nation in the war with Iraq. Why did Blair remain in office so long? Because they had bought into him as a leader. As a result, they were willing to live with their philosophical difference with him. When followers like the leader and the vision, they get behind both the leader and the vision. When people believe in their leader and the vision, they will follow their leader no matter how bad conditions get or how much odds are stacked against them. That's why the Indian people in Gandhi's day refused to fight back, as soldiers mowed them down. That's what inspired the U.S. space program to fulfill John F. Kennedy's vision and put a man on the moon. That's the reason people continued to have hope and keep alive the dream of Martin Luther King, Jr., even after he was gunned down. That's what continues to inspire followers to keep running the race, even when they feel they've hit the wall and given everything they've got. As a leader, having a great vision and a worthy cause is not enough to get people to follow you. You have to become a better leader. You must get your people to buy into you. That is the price you have to pay if you want your vision to have a chance of becoming a reality. You cannot ignore the law of buy-in and remain successful as a leader. If in the past you tried to get people to act on your vision but were unable to make it happen, you probably came up against the law of buy-in, maybe without even knowing it. As a leader, you don't earn any points for failing in a noble cause. You don't get credit for being right as you bring the organization to a halt. Your success is measured by your ability to actually take the people where they need to go. But you can do that only if the people first buy into you as a leader. That's the reality of the law of buy-in. Law number 15, the law of victory. Leaders find a way for the team to win. Have you ever thought about what separates the leaders who achieve victory from those who suffer defeat? I think that victorious leaders have one thing in common. They share an unwillingness to accept defeat. The alternative to winning is totally unacceptable to them. As a result, they figure out what must be done to achieve victory. Crisis seems to bring out the best and the worst in leaders, because at such times the pressure is intense and the stakes are high. That was certainly true during World War II, when Adolf Hitler was threatening to crush Europe and remake it according to his vision. But against the power of Hitler and his Nazi hordes stood a leader determined to win, a practitioner of the law of victory, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. He inspired the British people to resist Hitler and ultimately win the war. Winston Churchill was a courageous leader who had practiced the law of victory throughout his life. He refused to buckle under the Nazis' threats. For more than a year, Great Britain stood alone, facing the threat of German invasion. When Hitler indicated that he wanted to make a deal with England, Churchill defied him. When Germany began bombing England, the British stood strong, and all the while Churchill looked for a way to gain victory. Time after time, Churchill rallied the British people. It began with his first speech after becoming Prime Minister, in which he said, "We have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many, many long months of struggle and of suffering. You ask, what is our policy? I can say, it is to wage war, by sea, land, and air, with all our might and with all the strength that God can give us, to wage war against a monstrous tyranny, never surpassed in the dark, lamentable catalogue of human crime. That is our policy. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory. Victory at all cost. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be. For without victory there is no survival." When Churchill sought the aid of Franklin Roosevelt, he was enlisting a leader who had practiced the law of victory for decades. It was a hallmark of Roosevelt's entire life. He had found a way to achieve political victory while winning over polio. When he was elected president and became responsible for pulling the American people out of the Great Depression, it was just another impossible situation that he learned how to fight through. And fight he did. Through the 1930s, the country was slowly recovering, due in a large part to his leadership. To Churchill and Roosevelt, victory was the only option. If they had accepted anything less, the world would be a very different place today. Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Arthur Schlesinger, Jr. noted, "Take a look at our present world. It is manifestly not Adolf Hitler's world. His 1,000-year Reich turned out to have a brief and bloody run of a dozen years. It is manifestly not Joseph Stalin's world. That ghastly world self-destructed before our eyes. Without Churchill and England, all of Europe would have fallen. Without Roosevelt in the United States, it might never have been reclaimed for freedom. But not even an Adolf Hitler and the army of the Third Reich could stand against two leaders dedicated to the law of victory. Whether it's a sports team, an army, a business, or a nonprofit organization, victory is possible as long as you have three components that contribute to a team's dedication to victory. Number 1, unity of vision. Teams succeed only when the players have a unified vision, no matter how much talent or potential there is. A team doesn't win the championship if its players are working from different agendas. That's true in professional sports. That's true in business. That's true in nonprofits. Number 2, diversity of skills. It almost goes without saying that a team needs diversity in skills. Can you imagine a whole hockey team of goalies or a football team of quarterbacks? How about a business where there are only salespeople or nothing but accountants, or a nonprofit organization with just fundraisers or only strategists? It doesn't make sense. Every organization requires diverse talents to succeed. Number 3, a leader dedicated to victory and raising players to their potential. It's true that having good players with diverse skills is important. As former Notre Dame head football coach Lou Holtz says, "You've got to have great athletes to win. I don't care who the coach is. You can't win without good athletes, but you can lose with them." This is where coaching makes the difference. In other words, you also require leadership to achieve victory. Unity of vision doesn't happen spontaneously. The right players with the proper diversity of talent don't come together on their own. It takes a leader to make those things happen. It takes a leader to provide the motivation, empowerment, and direction required to win. One of the most noteworthy success stories I've come across is that of Southwest Airlines' Herb Kelleher, whom I mentioned in the chapter on the law of connection. The company's story is an admirable example of the law of victory in action. Today, Southwest looks like a powerhouse that has everything going for it. In the routes where it flies, it dominates the market. The company is on a steady growth curve, and its stock performs extremely well. It is the only U.S. airline that has earned a profit every year since 1973, even as other airlines have gone bankrupt and disappeared. It is the only airline that has thrived in the wake of 9/11. Employees love working there. Turnover is extremely low, and the company is considered to have the most productive workforce in the industry. And it's extremely popular with customers. Southwest gets consistently superior customer service ratings. It has maintained the fewest overall customer service complaints in the industry since 1987. Given Southwest's current position, you might think it has always been a powerhouse. That's not the case. In fact, it's a testament to the law of victory that the company even exists today. The airline was begun in 1967 by Roland Keene, owner of a small commuter air service in Texas, John Parker, a banker, and Herb Kelleher, an attorney. But it took them 4 years to get their first plane off the ground. And as soon as the company incorporated, Braniff, Trans-Texas, and Continental Airlines all tried to put it out of business. And they almost succeeded. One court battle followed another, and one man more than any other made the fight his own. Herb Kelleher. When their startup capital was gone and they seemed to be defeated, the board wanted to give up. However, Kelleher said, "Let's go one more round with them. I will continue to represent the company in court, and I'll postpone any legal fees and pay every cent of the court cost out of my own pocket." Finally, when their case made it to the Texas Supreme Court, the trio won, and they were at last able to put their planes in the air. Once it got going, Southwest hired experienced airline leader Lamar Muse as its new CEO. He in turn hired the best executives available. And as other airlines kept trying to put them out of business, Kelleher and Muse kept fighting in court and in the marketplace. When they had trouble filling their planes going to and from Houston, Southwest began flying into Houston's Hobby Airport, which is more accessible to commuters because of its proximity to downtown. When all the major carriers moved to the newly created Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, Southwest kept flying into convenient Love Field. When the airline had to sell one of its 4 planes to survive, the executives figured out a way for their remaining planes to be on the ground no longer than an amazingly short 10 minutes between flights. That way, Southwest could maintain routes and schedules. And when they couldn't figure out any other way to fill their planes, they pioneered peak and off-peak pricing, giving leisure travelers a huge break in the cost of fares. Through it all, Kelleher kept fighting and helped keep Southwest alive. In 1978, 7 years after he helped put the company's first small fleet of planes into the air, he became chairman of the company. In 1982, he was made president and CEO. Today, he serves as executive chairman of the board. He and his colleagues continue to fight and find ways for the company to win. Southwest's president, Colleen Barrett, sums it up. The warrior mentality, the very fight to survive, is truly what created our culture. What Kelleher, Barrett, and the rest of the Southwest leadership team have is not just a will to survive, but a will to win. Leaders who practice the law of victory believe that anything less than success is unacceptable. They have no plan B. That is why they keep fighting, and it's why they continue to win. What is your level of expectation when it comes to succeeding for your organization? How dedicated are you to winning your game? Are you going to have the law of victory in your corner as you fight, or when times get difficult, are you going to throw in the towel? Your answer to that question may determine whether you succeed or fail as a leader, and whether your team wins or loses. Law number 16, the law of the Big Mo. Momentum is a leader's best friend. If ever there was a person with talent and vision, it was Ed Catmull. In 1979, filmmaker George Lucas hired Catmull to run the computer graphics division of Lucasfilm Limited. Catmull tried to convince Lucas to let him try to make computer-generated feature films, but the technology was still in its early stages and too expensive. Instead, Lucas decided to sell the division. In 1986, Steve Jobs bought it by paying $5 million for it and putting an additional $5 million into the company. He named it Pixar. While it was struggling to become profitable, Pixar began making short films to demonstrate the power of its technology. The first was called Luxo Jr. It shows two animated desk lamps interacting as a parent and a child would. Luxo Jr. was so good that it was nominated for an Academy Award. But Catmull and his team were still a long way from achieving his dream of creating a full-length feature film. The company's greatest challenge at that time was merely surviving. Then in 1991, because of the credibility Pixar had earned, it got a significant break. The leaders thought the company was ready to take its next big step, creating a 1-hour television special. John Lasseter, an animator who teamed up with Catmull, approached Disney, his former employer, to pitch the idea. The response amazed him. Disney offered a contract to create 3 full-length feature movies using computer animation. Disney would fund and distribute the projects. Pixar would create them and receive a percentage of the profits. Pixar finally had an opportunity to fulfill Catmull's vision, but the company was still far from realizing it. The company got to work on what would become Toy Story, but the team had trouble with the characters and the story. It would take Pixar 4 years to make the movie. Though the rest of the world wasn't seeing it yet, Pixar was starting to develop momentum. That became obvious to everyone when Toy Story opened in November 1995. When the contract with Disney was signed 4 years earlier, Pixar's CEO Steve Jobs estimated that if the first movie was a modest hit, say $75 million at the box office, we'll both break even. If it gets $100 million, we'll both make money. But if it's a real blockbuster and earns $200 million or so at the box office, we'll make good money and Disney will make a lot of money. Few people would have predicted that it would make $192 million domestically and $362 million worldwide. From that time, Pixar's momentum has been strong and, if anything, has continued to grow. The organization has won 17 Oscars and been awarded 42 patents. And since Toy Story came out, the company has produced hit after hit: A Bug's Life, Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, and Cars. Worldwide, those movies have earned more than $3.67 billion. Ironically, while Pixar was gaining momentum, Disney, the company who helped it create its breakthrough, was losing momentum. Disney's animation division had fallen on hard times. Its last significant animated movie was Lilo and Stitch in 2002, and it had produced 3 highly expensive bombs: Atlantis, Treasure Planet, and Home on the Range. How could Disney possibly regain some momentum? Bob Iger, who became Disney's president and CEO in October 2005, knew how. He purchased Pixar. Now the people Disney once helped were helping Disney. Catmull became Disney's president of feature animation, and Lasseter was made chief creative officer. Disney has had 2 major heydays, says Catmull. We're going to make a third. And what about Pixar? It will continue to function as before under the care of Catmull and Lasseter. When you've got great momentum, you don't want to do anything to get in its way. After all, momentum is a leader's best friend. Many times, it's the only thing that makes the difference between losing and winning. When you have no momentum, even the simplest tasks seem impossible. Small problems look like insurmountable obstacles. Morale becomes low. The future appears dark. An organization with no momentum is like a train at a dead stop. It's hard to get going, and even small wooden blocks on the track can keep it from going anywhere. On the other hand, when you have momentum on your side, the future looks bright. Obstacles appear small, and troubles seem inconsequential. An organization with momentum is like a train that's moving 60 miles per hour. You could build a steel-reinforced concrete wall across the tracks, and the train would plow right through it. When leadership is strong and there is momentum in an organization, people are motivated and inspired to perform at higher levels. They become effective beyond their hopes and expectations. If you remember the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team, you know what I'm talking about. The team was good, but not good enough to win the gold medal. Yet that's what the Americans did. Why? Because leading up to the championship game, they won game after game against very tough teams. They gained so much momentum that they performed beyond everyone's expectations. And after they beat the Russians, nothing could stop them from coming home with the gold medal. The same kind of thing is true in business and volunteer organizations. When an organization has great momentum, all participants are more successful than they would be otherwise. I'll tell you how I know that that's true. If you see leaders, especially mid-level ones, who have had great success in an organization with momentum, leave that organization and suddenly their performance becomes merely average, you know the law of the Big Mo was at work. Even average people can perform far above average in an organization with great momentum. Momentum is easier to steer than to start. Have you ever been water skiing? If you have, you know that it's harder to get up on the water than it is to steer once you're up there. It takes a leader to create momentum. Followers can catch it. Good managers are able to use it to their advantage once it has begun. Everyone can enjoy the benefits it brings, but creating momentum requires someone who has a vision, can assemble a good team, and motivate others. If the leader is looking for someone to motivate him, then the organization is in trouble. If the leader is waiting for the organization to develop momentum on its own, then the organization is in trouble. It is the leader's responsibility to initiate momentum and keep it going. U.S. President Harry Truman once said, "If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen." But for leaders, that statement should be changed to, "If you can't make some heat, get out of the kitchen." If you don't believe in the vision and enthusiastically pursue it, doing all that you can to bring it to fruition, then you won't start making the small gains required to get the ball rolling. However, if you model enthusiasm to your people day in and day out, you attract like-minded people to your team, department, or organization and motivate them to achieve. You will begin to see forward progress. Once you do, you will begin to generate momentum, and if you're wise, you'll value it for what it is, the leader's best friend. Once you have it, you can do almost anything. That's the power of the Big Mo. Several years ago, I saw a movie called Stand and Deliver that illustrates the hopelessness many people feel in an organization without momentum. Maybe you've seen it too. It's about a real-life teacher named Jamie Escalante, who worked at Garfield High School in East Los Angeles, California. Teaching, motivating, and leading were in Jamie Escalante's blood even from the time of his youth in native Bolivia. He quickly became known as his city's finest teacher. When he was in his 30s, Escalante and his family immigrated to the United States. He worked several years in a restaurant and then at Russell Electronics. Though he could have pursued a promising career at Russell, he went back to school and earned a second bachelor's degree so that he could teach in the United States. Escalante's burning desire was to make a difference in people's lives. At age 43, he was hired by Garfield High School to teach computer science. But when he arrived at Garfield on the first day of class, he found out that there was no funding for computers. And because his degree was in mathematics, he would be teaching basic math. Disappointed, he went in search of his first class, hoping that his dream of making a difference wasn't slipping through his fingers. The change from computers to math turned out to be the least of Escalante's problems. The school, which had been empty and quiet during his summertime interview, was now in chaos. Discipline was non-existent. Fights seemed to break out continually. Trash and graffiti were everywhere. Students and even outsiders from the neighborhood roamed all over the campus throughout the day. Gang activity was rampant. It was a teacher's worst nightmare. Almost daily he thought of quitting. But his passion for teaching and his dedication to improving the lives of his students wouldn't allow him to give up. Yet at the same time, Escalante was enough of a leader to know that the students were doomed if the school didn't change. They were all sliding backward fast, and they needed something to move them forward. When a new principal was brought in, things began to change for the better. But Escalante wanted to take it further. He believed that the way to improve the school was to challenge the school's best and brightest with a calculus class that would prepare them for an AP class, earning them college credit. In the fall of 1978, Escalante organized the first calculus class, rounding up every possible candidate who might be able to handle the course from Garfield's 3,500 student population. He was able to find only 14 students. In the first few classes, he laid out the work it would take for them to prepare for the AP Calculus test at the end of the year. By the end of the second week of school, he had lost 7 students. Even the ones who stayed were not well prepared for calculus, and by late spring, he was down to only 5 students. All of them took the AP test in May, but only 2 passed. Escalante was disappointed, but he refused to give up, especially since he had made progress. He knew that if he could help his students experience a few wins, build their confidence, and give them hope, he could move them forward. He was determined to do whatever it took. To motivate them, he'd give them extra homework or challenge one of the school athletes to a handball match. Escalante never lost. If they needed encouragement, he'd take them out to McDonald's as a reward. If they got lazy, he'd inspire, amaze, amuse, and even intimidate them. And all along the way, he modeled hard work, dedication to excellence, and desire. The next fall, Escalante put together another calculus class, this time with 9 students. At the end of the year, 8 took the test and 6 passed. He was making progress. Word of his success spread. Students heard that Escalante's protégés were earning college credit, and in the fall of 1980, his calculus class numbered 15. When they all took the test at the end of the year, 14 students passed. The steps forward weren't huge, but Escalante could see that the program was building momentum. The next group of students, numbering 18, was the subject of the movie Stand and Deliver. Like their predecessors, they worked very hard to learn calculus, many coming to school at 7 a.m. every day, a full hour and a half before school started. And often they stayed until 5, 6, or 7 p.m. And though Educational Testing Service questioned the validity of the first test students took, they had to take it a second time. 100% of them passed. After that, the math program exploded. But the benefits of the law of the Big Mo were felt by all of the Garfield High School students. The school started offering classes to prepare students for other AP exams. In time, Garfield held regular AP classes in Spanish, calculus, history, European history, biology, physics, French, government, and computer science. In 1987, 9 years after Escalante spearheaded the program, Garfield students took more than 325 AP examinations. Most incredibly, Garfield had a waiting list of more than 400 students from areas outside its boundaries wanting to enroll. The school that was once the laughingstock of the district and that had almost lost its accreditation had become one of the top 3 inner-city schools in the entire nation. That's the power of the law of the Big Mo. Law number 17, the law of priorities. Leaders understand that activity is not necessarily accomplishment. When we are busy, we naturally believe that we are achieving. But busyness does not equal productivity. Activity is not necessarily accomplishment. Prioritizing requires leaders to continually think ahead, to know what's important, to know what's next, to see how everything relates to the overall vision. That's hard work. Prioritizing also causes us to do things that are at the least uncomfortable and sometimes downright painful. Every year I spend about 2 weeks in December reevaluating my priorities. I review the previous year's schedule, I look at my upcoming commitments, I evaluate my family life, I think about my goals, I look at the big picture of what I'm doing to make sure the way I'm living lines up with my values and priorities. One of the guiding principles I use during the process is the Pareto principle. I've often taught it to people at leadership conferences over the years, and I also explain it in depth in my book, Developing the Leader Within You. The idea is this. If you focus your attention on the activities that rank in the top 20% in terms of importance, you'll have an 80% return on your effort. For example, if you have 10 employees, you should give 80% of your time and attention to the best 2. If you have 100 customers, the top 20 will provide you with 80% of your business, so focus on them. If your to-do list has 10 items on it, the 2 most important ones will give you an 80% return on your time. If you haven't already observed this phenomenon, test it, and you'll see that it really plays out that way. One year as I went through this process, I realized that I had to totally refocus and restructure one of my organizations. The other guideline that I use whenever I evaluate my priorities is the 3 R's. No, not reading, writing, and arithmetic. My 3 R's are requirement, return, and reward. I believe that to be effective, leaders must order their lives according to these 3 questions. 1, what is required? We're all accountable to somebody for the work we do, an employer, a board of directors, stockholders, the government, and so on. We also have responsibility for the important people in our lives, such as spouse, children, and parents. For that reason, any list of priorities must begin with what is required of us. The question I ask myself is, what must I do that nobody can or should do for me? As I have gotten older, that list has gotten shorter and shorter. If I'm doing something that's not necessary, I should eliminate it. If I'm doing something that's necessary but not required of me personally, I need to delegate it. Number 2, what gives the greatest return? As a leader, you should spend most of your time working in your areas of greatest strength. Ideally, leaders should get out of their comfort zone but should stay in their strength zone. Here's my rule of thumb. If something I'm doing can be done 80% as well by someone else, I delegate it. If you have a responsibility that someone else could do according to that standard or that could potentially meet that standard, then develop and train a person to handle it. Just because you can do something does not mean that you should do it. Remember, leaders understand that activity is not necessarily accomplishment. That's the law of priorities. Number 3, what brings the greatest reward? The final question relates to personal satisfaction. Tim Redmond, president of Redmond Leadership Institute, observed, "There are many things that will catch my eye, but there are only a few things that will catch my heart. Life is too short not to do things that you love. I love to teach leadership. I love writing and speaking. I love spending time with my wife, children, my grandchildren. I love playing golf. No matter what else I do, I will make time for those things. They are the fire lighters in my life. They energize me. They keep me passionate. And passion provides the fuel in a person's life to keep him going. It is the responsibility of leaders to make tough decisions based on priorities. That can sometimes make them unpopular. Back in 1981, when Jack Welch became chairman and CEO of General Electric, it was a good company. It had a 90-year history. The company's stock traded at $4 a share, and the company was worth about $12 billion, 11th best on the stock market. It was a huge, diverse company that included 350 strategic businesses. But Welch believed the company could become better. What was his strategy? He used the law of priorities. Within a few months of taking over the company, he began what he called the hardware revolution. It changed the entire profile and focus of the company. Welch said, To the hundreds of businesses and product lines that made up the company, we applied a single criterion. Can they be number one or number two at whatever they do in the world marketplace? Of the 348 businesses or product lines that could not, we closed some and divested others. Their sale brought in almost $10 billion. We invested $18 billion in the ones that remained and further strengthened them with $17 billion worth of acquisitions. What remained in 1989, aside from a few relatively small supporting operations, are 14 world-class businesses, all well-positioned for the 90s, each one either first or second in the world market in which it participates. I know Welch is out of favor in some circles, and recently his methods have been criticized, but his leadership was right for his time and situation. He reprioritized GE, and his strong leadership and focus paid incredible dividends. During his tenure, GE stock experienced a 2-to-1 split 4 times, and it traded at more than $80 per share when he retired. The company was ranked as the nation's most admired company, according to Fortune, and it continues to be one of the most valuable companies in the world. That came about because of Welch's ability to use the law of priorities in his leadership. He never mistook activity for accomplishment. He knew that the greatest success comes only after you focus your people on what really matters. Examine the lives of all effective leaders, and you will see them putting priorities into action. Every time Norman Schwarzkopf assumed a new command, he didn't just rely on his leadership intuition. He also re-examined the unit's priorities. Lance Armstrong was able to win 7 Tour de France championships because his priorities guided his training regimen. When explorer Roald Amundsen succeeded in taking his team to the South Pole and back, it was due in part to his ability to set right priorities. Successful leaders live according to the law of priorities. They recognize that activity is not necessarily accomplishment. Law number 18, the law of sacrifice. A leader must give up to go up. Why does an individual step forward to lead other people? For every person, the answer is different. A few do to survive. Some do it to make money. Many desire to build a business or organization. Others do it because they want to change the world. That was the reason for Martin Luther King, Jr. King accepted his first pastorate in Montgomery, Alabama, at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in 1954, and settled into family life when his first child was born the next year in November. But that peace didn't last long. Less than a month later, Rosa Parks refused to relinquish her seat on a bus to a white passenger and was arrested. Local African-American leaders arranged a one-day boycott of the transit system to protest her arrest and the city's segregation policy. When it was successful, they decided to create the Montgomery Improvement Association to continue the boycott. Already recognized as a leader in the community, King was unanimously elected president of the newly formed organization. For the next year, King led African-American community leaders in a boycott with the goal of changing the system. The MIA negotiated with city leaders and demanded courteous treatment of African Americans by bus operators, first-come, first-served seating for all bus riders, and employment of African American bus drivers. While the boycott was on, community leaders organized carpools, raised funds to support the boycott financially, rallied and mobilized the community with sermons, and coordinated legal challenges with the NAACP. Filed in November 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the laws allowing segregated seating on buses. King and the other leaders were successful. Their world was beginning to change. The Montgomery bus boycott was a major step in the American civil rights movement, and it's easy to see what was gained as a result of it. But King also began paying a personal cost for it. Soon after the boycott began, King was arrested for a minor traffic violation. A bomb was thrown onto his porch, and he was indicted on a charge of being party to a conspiracy to hinder and prevent the operation of business without just or legal cause. Keene was emerging as a leader, but he was paying a price for it. Each time Keene climbed higher and moved forward in leadership for the cause of civil rights, the greater the price he paid for it. His wife, Coretta Scott Keene, remarked in My Life with Martin Luther King, Jr., "Day and night our phone would ring and someone would pour out a string of obscene epithets. Frequently the calls ended with a threat to kill us if we didn't get out of town. But in spite of all the danger, the chaos of our private lives, I felt inspired, almost elated." Keene did some great things as a leader. He met with presidents, he delivered rousing speeches that are considered some of the most outstanding examples of oration in American history. He led 250,000 people in a peaceful march on Washington, D.C. He received the Nobel Peace Prize, and he did create change in this country. But the law of sacrifice demands that the greater the leader, the more he must give up. During that same period, Keene was arrested many times and jailed on many occasions. He was stoned, stabbed, and physically attacked. His house was bombed, yet his vision and his influence continued to increase. Ultimately, he sacrificed everything he had, but what he gave up, he parted with willingly. Eventually, he paid the ultimate price of sacrifice. Keene's impact was profound. He influenced millions of people to peacefully stand up against a system and society that fought to exclude them. The United States has changed for the better because of his leadership. There is a common misperception among people who aren't leaders that leadership is all about the position, perks, and power that come from rising in an organization. Many people today want to climb up the corporate ladder because they believe that freedom, power, and wealth are the prizes waiting at the top. The life of a leader can look glamorous to people on the outside, but the reality is that leadership requires sacrifice. A leader must give up to go up. In recent years, we've observed more than our share of leaders who used and abused their organizations for their personal benefit, and the resulting corporate scandals that came because of their greed and selfishness. The heart of good leadership is sacrifice. If you desire to become the best leader you can be, then you need to be willing to make sacrifices in order to lead well. If that is your desire, then here are some things you need to know about the law of sacrifice. Number 1, there is no success without sacrifice. Every person who has achieved any success in life has made sacrifices to do so. Many working people dedicate 4 or more years and pay thousands of dollars to attend college to get the tools that they'll need before embarking on their career. Athletes sacrifice countless hours in the gym or on the practice field, preparing themselves to perform at a higher level. Parents give up much of their free time and sacrifice their resources in order to do a good job raising their children. Leaders must give up to go up. That's true of every leader, regardless of profession. Talk to leaders and you will find that they have made repeated sacrifices. Effective leaders sacrifice much that is good in order to dedicate themselves to what is best. That's the way the law of sacrifice works. Number 2, leaders are often asked to give up more than others. The heart of leadership is putting others ahead of yourself. It's doing what is best for the team. For that reason, I believe that leaders have to give up their rights. When you have no responsibilities, you can do pretty much anything you want. Once you take on responsibility, you start to experience limitations in what you can do. The more responsibility you accept, the fewer options you have. Everyone who leads gives up other opportunities. Some people have to give up beloved hobbies. Many give up aspects of their personal lives. Some, like Keene, give their actual lives. The circumstances are different from person to person, but the principle doesn't change. Leadership means sacrifice. Number 3, you must keep giving up to stay up. Most people are willing to acknowledge that sacrifices are necessary early in a leadership career in order to make progress. They'll take an undesirable territory to make a name for themselves. They'll move their family to a less desirable city to accept a better position. They'll take a temporary cut in pay for greater opportunities for advancement. The problem for leaders comes when they think they've earned the right to stop making sacrifices. But in leadership, sacrifice is an ongoing process, not a one-time payment. If leaders have to give up to go up, then they have to give up even more to stay up. Have you ever considered how infrequently sports teams have back-to-back championship seasons? The reason is simple. If a leader can win one championship with his team, he often assumes he can duplicate the results the next year by doing the same thing. He becomes reluctant to make additional sacrifices in the off-season to prepare for what is often an even greater challenge the next year. But today's success is the greatest threat to tomorrow's success. And what gets a team to the top isn't what keeps it there. The only way to stay up is to give up even more. Leadership success requires continual change, constant improvement, and ongoing sacrifice. Number 4, the higher the level of leadership, the greater the sacrifice. Have you ever been part of an auction? It's an exciting experience. An item comes up for a bid, and everyone in the room gets excited. When the bidding opens, lots of people jump in and take part. But as the price goes higher and higher, what happens? There are fewer and fewer bidders. When the price is low, everyone bids. In the end, only one person is willing to pay the high price that the item actually cost. It's the same in leadership. The higher you go, the more it's going to cost you. And it doesn't matter what kind of leadership career you pick. You will have to make sacrifices. You will have to give up to go up. There can be no success without sacrifice. Anytime you see success, you can be sure someone made sacrifices to make it happen. And as a leader, if you sacrifice, even if you don't witness the success, you can be sure that someone in the future will benefit from what you've given. That was certainly true of Martin Luther King, Jr. He did not live to see most of the benefits of his sacrifices, but many others have. One such person was an African-American girl born in segregated Birmingham, Alabama in 1954. A precocious child, she followed the news of the day, including civil rights struggles. A neighbor recalls that she was always interested in politics because, as a little girl, she used to call me and say things like, "Did you see what Bull Connor did today?" describing the racist city commissioner. She was just a little girl, and she did that all the time. I would have to read the newspaper thoroughly because I wouldn't know what she was going to talk about. Though she had an interest in current events, her passion was music. While other children were out playing, she was studying and practicing the piano. Her parents named her Condoleezza, from the musical notation con dolcezza, which means with sweetness. Her schedule was often grueling. After the family moved to Denver when she was 13, she worked harder and made more sacrifices. She was highly disciplined. To be able to compete in both figure skating and piano competitions, she would get up at 4:30 in the morning to fit everything in. One of her teachers commented, "There was a core of her that revealed she knew what she wanted and was willing to make the sacrifices." I think in her mind, they were not sacrifices, but things to do that were necessary to keep with her goals. And her parents supported her fully, and were willing to make sacrifices for her success as well. To assist her in her goals as a pianist, they took out a $13,000 loan in 1969 to buy her a used Steinway grand piano. Rice graduated early from high school and went to the University of Denver with the intention of earning a degree in music and becoming a professional concert pianist. It was something that she had made sacrifices her entire life to do. But after her sophomore year, she realized that if she was going to reach her personal potential, it would not be in music. So she began searching for a new field. She found it in international politics. She was drawn like a magnet to Russian culture and the Soviet government. For the next 2 years, she immersed herself in her courses, did extensive outside reading, and learned the Russian language. She had found her niche, and she was still willing to pay the price to go to the highest level. After graduating with her bachelor's degree, she went on to Notre Dame to get her master's degree. She then returned to the University of Denver and earned a Ph.D. at the age of 26. When she received an offer for a fellowship at Stanford, she jumped at it. A few months later, she was recruited to become a member of the university's faculty. She had arrived. Most people would be happy if the rest of the story played out something like this: publish a few articles, then a book or two, earn tenure, and eventually settle into a comfortable life in the academic community. Not Rice. True, she did carve out a place for herself at Stanford. It was an environment that she loved. She enjoyed the intellectual stimulation. She was a talented teacher who found teaching and counseling students highly rewarding. She even became an avid fan of the university's sports teams. She thrived and received one award after the other. But she spent a year at the Pentagon in an advisory position with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She called it a reality check, practical experience that informed her teaching and writing. Then in 1989, the White House called. She was invited to accept a position on the National Security Council as the Director of Soviet and East European Affairs. She took a leave of absence from Stanford, and it turned out to be a wonderful decision. She was President George H.W. Bush's primary advisor on the Soviet Union as that government disintegrated, and she helped in creating policy for the unification of Germany. It made her one of the world's experts on the subject. She returned to Stanford after 2 years in Washington. Back at Stanford, she possessed even greater clout. In 2 years, she was made a full professor at the age of 38. A month later, she was asked to become provost, a position that had never been held by an African American, by a woman, or by anyone so young. As the second in command at one of the world's premier universities, Rice had it made. She had proven herself as an executive. She was already sitting on many corporate boards, and she was in position to become president of any university in the nation. So some people might have been surprised when she stepped down as provost and began tutoring George W. Bush, then governor of Texas, on foreign policy. But it was a sacrifice she was willing to make, one that led her to becoming National Security Advisor and eventually U.S. Secretary of State. As I read this, Rice continues to serve in that role. What once looked like a sacrifice has made her more influential than ever. She has been consistently willing to give up, to go up, and I have no doubt that she will make whatever sacrifices are necessary to take the next step. That's what happens when a leader understands and lives by the law of sacrifice. Law number 19, the law of timing. When to lead is as important as what to do and where to go. If ever there was an example of the importance of timing as it relates to leadership, it came in New Orleans in late August and early September of 2005. On Wednesday, August 24, 2005, nobody in New Orleans could have known that the newly formed tropical storm named Katrina would be the big one. The hurricane the city had feared would someday come. It wasn't until Friday that the National Hurricane Center predicted that the storm would reach landfall on Monday somewhere near Burris, Louisiana, about 60 miles southeast of New Orleans. The hurricane was already looking like a bad one. The next morning, Saturday, August 27th, the leaders of many of Louisiana's parishes around New Orleans ordered mandatory evacuations. St. Charles, Plaquemine, parts of Jefferson, and even St. Tammany, which is situated on higher ground north of New Orleans. But what about New Orleans? Why didn't Mayor Ray Nagin, the leader of the city, order a mandatory evacuation at the same time? Many people say New Orleanians are fatalistic, and they can't be made to move any faster than they want to go. Others say that Nagin, a businessman before he was elected, was worried about the legal and financial implications of an evacuation. I say he and others in government didn't understand the law of timing. When to lead is as important as what to do and where to go. The time to move the people of New Orleans was when the other parish leaders announced their mandatory evacuations. Nagin waited. On Saturday evening, he finally announced a voluntary evacuation of New Orleans. Only after Max Mayfield, the director of the National Hurricane Center, called Nagin on Saturday night did the mayor become concerned enough to act. Max scared the crap out of me, Nagin is reported to have said after the call. The next morning at 9 o'clock, Nagin finally ordered a mandatory evacuation, fewer than 24 hours before the hurricane would make landfall. It was much too late for many citizens of New Orleans. And how did he plan to help those people who couldn't make it out of town on such a short notice? He advised them to get to the Superdome, the city's shelter of last resort, however they could. But he made no real provisions for them. If someone was going to step in and lead, it would have had to occur somewhere other than the local level. Most people began looking to the federal government for leadership, but they violated the law of timing too. Not until Wednesday, August 31, did Director of Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff, release a memo declaring Katrina an incident of national significance. A key designation needed to trigger swift federal coordination. President Bush didn't meet with his cabinet until the following day to determine how to launch the White House task force on Hurricane Katrina response. Meanwhile, the people stranded in New Orleans waited for help. On Thursday, September 1, the Red Cross requested permission to take water, food, and supplies to the people who were stranded in the city, but their request was denied by the Louisiana Office of Homeland Security. They were asked to wait another day. Finally, on Sunday, September 4, 6 days after New Orleans flooded, the evacuation of the Superdome was finally complete. The way Katrina was handled shows leadership timing at its worst. It was botched at every level. Good leaders recognize that when to lead is as important as what to do and where to go. Timing is often the difference between success and failure in an endeavor. Every time a leader must make a move, there are really only 4 outcomes. Number 1, the wrong action at the wrong time leads to disaster. A leader who takes the wrong action at the wrong time is sure to suffer negative repercussions. That was certainly the case in New Orleans as Katrina approached. Nagin's poor leadership set in motion a series of wrong actions at the wrong time. He waited until it was too late to call for mandatory evacuation. He sent faxes to local churches, hoping that they would help with evacuating people. But by the time he did so, the people who would have received the faxes were already long gone. He picked a poor location for the shelter of last resort, neglected to supply it properly, and failed to provide adequate transportation for people to get there. One wrong action after another led to disaster. Obviously, the stakes for every leadership decision are not as high as they were for Mayor Nagin. But every leadership situation requires that leaders heed the law of timing. If you lead a department or a small team, and you take the wrong action at the wrong time, your people will suffer, and so will your leadership. Number 2, the right action at the wrong time brings resistance. When it comes to good leadership, having a vision for the direction of the organization or team and knowing how to get there aren't enough. If you take the right action but do it at the wrong time, you may still be unsuccessful because the people you lead can become resistant. Good leadership timing requires many things. Understanding. Leaders must have a firm grasp on the situation. Maturity. If leaders' motives aren't right, their timing will be off. Confidence. People follow leaders who know what must be done. Decisiveness. Wishy-washy leaders create wishy-washy followers. Experience. If leaders don't possess experience, then they need to gain wisdom from others who do possess it. Intuition. Timing often depends on intangibles such as momentum and morale. Preparation. If the conditions aren't right, leaders must create those conditions. Without all of those things, timing is bound to be off. Number 3, the wrong action at the right time is a mistake. People who are naturally entrepreneurial often possess a strong sense of timing. They intuitively know when it's time to make a move, to seize an opportunity. They sometimes make mistakes in their actions at those key moments. My brother, Larry, who is an excellent businessman, has coached me in this area. Larry says the greatest mistake made by entrepreneurs and other people in business is knowing when to cut their losses or when to increase their investment to maximize their gains. Their mistakes come from taking the wrong action at the right time. Number 4, the right action at the right time results in success. When the right leader and the right timing come together, incredible things happen. An organization achieves its goals, reaps incredible rewards, and gains momentum. Success almost becomes inevitable. If you look at the history of nearly any organization, you will find a pivotal moment when the right leader took the right action at the right time, and it transformed the organization. When the stakes are high, the consequences of the law of timing are dramatic and immediate. That is certainly true in war. In any major battle, the critical importance of timing becomes evident. The Battle of Gettysburg during the American Civil War is a prime example. When Confederate General Robert E. Lee took the Army of Northern Virginia into Pennsylvania in late June of 1863, it was the third year of the war, and both the Union and the Confederacy were growing weary of this conflict. Several days prior to the battle, Lee told General Trimble, "I have not yet heard that the enemy have crossed the Potomac, and am waiting to hear from General Stuart. When they hear where they are, they will make forced marches. They will come up, broken down from hunger and hard marching, strung out on a long line and much demoralized when they come to Pennsylvania. I shall throw an overwhelming force on their advance, crush it, follow up the success, drive one corps back into the other, and by successive repulses and surprises, before they can concentrate, create a panic, and virtually destroy the army." Lee was trying to seize the opportunity for overwhelming victory. He didn't know until the morning of July 1 that the Union Army had already moved north. By then, some of its forces were already engaging Confederate troops on Chambersburg Road west of Gettysburg. That development disrupted Lee's strategy and ruined his timing. Lee's first instinct was to hold back and wait for his army's full strength to assemble before forcing a major engagement. But always conscious of the importance of timing, he recognized when his troops had sudden advantage. As Lee watched from a nearby ridge, he saw that Federal troops were being routed and retreating. There was still a chance to take action that could lead to victory. Confederate forces could attack and seize the high ground of Cemetery Hill, defended only by a few Union infantry reserves and artillery. In position to take that hill was Confederate General R.S. Ewell. It was still early in the day, and if Ewell moved forward, he could take it. But instead of pressing his advantage when the time was ripe and engaging the enemy, Ewell simply watched. He let the opportunity slip away, and the Confederates didn't take Cemetery Hill. By the next morning, Union troops had reinforced their previous positions, and the South's chance was gone. President Lincoln recognized that the timing was right. The Union Army could crush what was left of the Confederate forces and could end the war. But just as the Southern forces did not seize the moment for victory when it was available to them, neither did their Northern counterparts. General Meade took his time following up his victory at Gettysburg, and he didn't pursue Lee aggressively enough. Lincoln knew he was seeing the Union's chance slip away, and he was right. What remained of the Army of Northern Virginia crossed over the Potomac, escaping destruction, and the war continued for almost 2 more years, and hundreds of thousands more troops died. Leaders from both sides had known what to do to achieve victory, but they failed to follow through at the critical moment. Reading the situation and knowing what to do are not enough to make you succeed in leadership. If you want your organization, department, or team to move forward, you must pay attention to timing. Only the right action at the right time will bring success. Anything else exacts a high price. No leader can escape the law of timing. Law number 20. The law of explosive growth. To add growth, lead followers. To multiply, lead leaders. In 1990, I traveled to a country in South America with my wife, Margaret, to teach leadership in a national conference. I could tell my comments were not connecting with them. They didn't engage, and what I was trying to communicate didn't seem to make an impact. The people I spoke to didn't understand leadership, and they had no desire to learn anything about it. For someone like me who believes that everything rises and falls on leadership, it drove me crazy. This wasn't the first time I had experienced such frustration. I noticed that whenever I traveled to developing countries, I faced similar situations. I suspect that in nations where there is no strong business infrastructure and where government doesn't allow its citizens much freedom, it is difficult for leaders to develop. On the flight home, I talked to Margaret about my frustrations. I finally summed it up, saying, I don't want to do this anymore. I traveled thousands of miles just to counsel people on petty conflicts. If they would just turn their attention to becoming leaders, it would change their lives. After listening patiently, Margaret replied, Maybe you're the one who's supposed to do something about this. Margaret's exhortation to do something about the leadership problems I had seen overseas stirred something within me. For the next several years, I reflected on the issue and thought about possible solutions. Finally, in 1996, I decided what I would do. I brought together a group of leaders to help me create a not-for-profit organization to develop leaders in government, education, and religious community. I named it EQUIP, which stands for Encouraging Qualities Undeveloped in People. We would try to develop 1 million leaders around the globe by 2008. How could a small non-profit organization hope to accomplish such a feat? By using the law of explosive growth. EQUIP's strategy, which came to be called the Million Leader Mandate, was to develop 40,000 leaders in countries around the world. Those leaders would attend a training session every 6 months in a city near them for 3 years. The only thing that would be asked of them in return was that they commit to personally develop 25 leaders in their own city, town, or village. EQUIP would provide the training material for the 40,000 leaders it trained, and it would provide material for the 25 leaders each of them would be developing. If the strategy succeeded, we would develop 1 million leaders. It was an ambitious plan. The question was, would it work? I'll give you the answer to that question later in this chapter. You can grow by leading followers, but if you want to maximize your leadership and help your organization reach its potential, you need to develop leaders. There is no other way to experience explosive growth. Becoming a leader who develops leaders requires an entirely different focus and attitude from simply attracting and leading followers. It takes a different mindset. When you're leading a group of people, who typically ask for the most time and attention? The weakest ones in the group. If you allow them to, they will consume 80% or more of your time. However, proactive leaders who practice the law of explosive growth don't allow that bottom 20% to take all their time. They seek out the best 20%, the people with the greatest leadership potential, and they invest their time developing them. They know that if they develop the best will help with the rest. There's a myth in some leadership circles that promotes the idea of treating everyone the same for the sake of fairness. What a mistake. As Mick Delaney says, any business or industry that pays equal rewards to its goof-offs and its eager beavers sooner or later will find itself with more goof-offs than eager beavers. Leaders who develop leaders give rewards, resources, and responsibility based on results. The greater the impact of leaders, the greater the opportunities they receive. Leaders who attract followers but never develop leaders get tired. Why? Because they themselves must deal with every person under their authority. Being able to impact only the people you can touch personally is very limiting. In contrast, leaders who develop leaders impact people far beyond their personal reach. If developing leaders has such a great impact, then why doesn't everyone do it? Because it's hard. Leadership development isn't an add water and stir proposition. It takes a lot of time, energy, and resources. Once you find leaders, drawing them in can be very difficult. They're entrepreneurial and want to go on their own way. If you try to recruit them, they want to know where you're going, how you plan to get there, who else you're planning to take with you, and whether they can drive. What you're doing has to be more compelling than what they're already doing. On top of that, your organization needs to create an environment that is attractive to them. That is often not the case. Most organizations desire stability. Leaders want excitement. Most organizations desire structure. Leaders want flexibility. Most organizations place a high value on following rules. Leaders want to think outside the box. If you want to gather leaders, you must create a place where they can thrive. As hard as it is to find and gather good leaders, it's even more difficult to keep them. The only way to lead leaders is to become a better leader yourself. If you keep growing and stay ahead of the people you lead, you will be able to keep adding value to the leaders who follow you. Your goals must be to keep developing them so that they can realize their potential. Only a leader can do that for another leader, because it takes a leader to raise up another leader. If you keep adding value to the leaders you lead, then they will be willing to stay with you. Do that long enough and they may never want to leave. Convinced that developing leaders was the key to reaching our goal of training 1 million leaders, Equip launched the MLN, Million Leaders Mandate Initiative, in 2002 in several cities in India, Indonesia, and the Philippines. We had chosen those areas because we had the best contacts there and had experienced success there in previous years. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of hungry leaders traveled to each site to engage in the 2-day training. Some attendees spent as many as 5 days walking to get to the event. And at the end of the training, when we asked attendees to commit to developing 25 leaders over the next 3 years using the materials that we would give them, more than 90% of the attendees signed on. With the first success under our belt, we moved forward. The next year we began training leaders in other parts of Asia and the Middle East. In 2004, we started training in Africa, in 2005, Europe, and in 2006, South America. In some cities, we had very modest success, with a few dozen leaders attending the training. In other cities, people came by the hundreds. Many leaders were able to commit to developing 25 leaders. Some could commit to training only 5 or 10, but others were training 100, 200, or 250 in their towns and cities. As I mentioned, we wanted to reach our goal of training 1 million leaders by 2008. At times, it was a struggle. In some countries, we had a difficult time gaining credibility. In others, it took us a long time to make connections with leaders. But to our great surprise and delight, in the spring of 2006, we reached our goal, 2 years ahead of schedule. Now, what seemed to be an impossible goal seems modest. In 2007, we trained our 2nd million, and we launched an initiative to develop 5 million leaders in the next 5 years. My hope and prayer are that before I'm finished, Equip and its partners will train 50 million leaders around the globe. That's explosive growth. Leaders who develop leaders experience an incredible multiplication effect in their organizations that can be achieved in no other way, not by increasing resources, reducing cost, increasing profit margins, improving systems, implementing quality procedures, or doing anything else. The only way to experience an explosive level of growth is to do the math. Leaders' math. That's the incredible power of the law of explosive growth. Law 21, the law of legacy. A leader's lasting value is measured by succession. What do you want people to say at your funeral? That may seem like an odd question, but it may be the most important thing that you can ask yourself as a leader. Most people never consider it. And that's not good, because if they don't, their lives and leadership can take a direction different from that of their greatest potential and impact. If you want your leadership to really have meaning, you need to take into account the law of legacy. Why? Because a leader's lasting value is measured by succession. Clare Boothe Luce, the writer, politician, and ambassador, popularized the idea of the life sentence, a statement summarizing the goal and the purpose of one's life. When I started in my career in the late 1960s, my life sentence could have been expressed as, I want to be a great pastor. Several years later, as I worked and realized my shortcomings as a speaker, my sentence changed to be, I want to be a great communicator. For more than a decade, improving my speaking skills became a major focus. However, when I reached my early 30s, I realized that if all I ever did was speak, my impact would always be limited. There are only so many days in a year and so many people who will come to an event to hear you. I wanted to reach more people than that. That's when I decided I want to be a great writer. But when I reached my 40s, my focus changed again. And that's when I decided I want to become a great leader. I wanted to build and lead organizations that could make a difference. I've discovered that at every stage of my life, I've grown and my world has gotten bigger. As the result, my life sentence has changed. When I was in my late 50s, I thought about all of the previous statements I had embraced, and I realized that they all had a common denominator: adding value to others. That was really my desire. I wanted to be an effective pastor, communicator, writer, and leader so that I could help people. Now that I've turned 60, I finally settled on the life sentence that I believe will serve me the rest of my days. When they hold my funeral, I hope I will have lived a life that prompts people to know why I was here. And they won't have to guess at it. My sentence is, I want to add value to leaders who will multiply value to others. Why is it so important to pay attention to your life sentence? Because your life sentence not only sets the direction for your life, but it also determines the legacy that you will leave. We have a choice about the legacy we will leave, and we must work and be intentional to leave the legacy we want. Most people simply accept their lives. They don't lead them. I believe people need to be proactive about how they live, and I believe that is especially true of leaders. A legacy lives on in people, not things. Too often leaders put their energy into organizations, buildings, systems, or other lifeless objects. But only people live on after we are gone. Everything else is temporary. There's often a natural progression to how leaders develop the area of legacy, starting with the desire to achieve. Achievement comes when they do big things by themselves. Success comes when they empower followers to do big things for them. Significance comes when they develop leaders to do great things with them. Legacy comes when they put leaders in position to do great things without them. Just about anybody can make an organization look good for a moment by launching a flashy new program or product, drawing crowds to a big event, or slashing the budget to boost the bottom line. But leaders who leave a legacy take a different approach. They take the long view. Author, educator, and theologian Elton Trueblood wrote, "We have made at least a start in discovering the meaning in human life when we plant a shade tree under which we know full well we will never sit." The best leaders lead today with tomorrow in mind by making sure that they invest in leaders who will carry their legacy forward. Why? Because a leader's lasting value is measured by succession. That is the law of legacy. Conclusion: everything rises and falls on leadership. Well, there you have them. The 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. Learn them, take them to heart, and apply them to your life. If you follow them, people will follow you. I wish you great leadership success. Pursue your dreams. Strive for excellence. Become the person you were created to be, and accomplish all that you were put on this earth to do. Leadership will help you do that. Learn to lead, not just for yourself, but for the people who will follow you. And as you reach the highest levels, don't forget to take others with you to be the leaders of tomorrow.
That concludes the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John C. Maxwell. Copyright 2007, published by Thomas Nelson. Dr. John C. Maxwell is an internationally recognized leadership expert, speaker, and author who has sold over 12 million books. His organizations have trained more than 1 million leaders worldwide. Dr. Maxwell is the founder of Enjoy Stewardship Services and Equip. Every year, he speaks to Fortune 500 companies, international government leaders, and organizations as diverse as the United States Military Academy at West Point and the National Football League. Look for the complete, unabridged 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership book in bookstores everywhere, as well as other books and audio programs by John C. Maxwell, including The Difference Maker, Talent is Never Enough, and The 360-Degree Leader.